Chapter 56-29. Could it be that the patrolling troops in the city aren't humans? Moya stared at the person who had the same face as the elder of the Fu Shui tribe among the patrolling troops in the ancient desolate city and made this guess. Senior, do you think they're all puppets? Kang Shinmu rubbed his chin and thought seriously. For example, the heart-devouring centipede? The two weren't unfamiliar with the term heart-devouring blood centipede. In order to not be controlled by Kang Shinmu, Elder Ao Tong of the demon god race gave up his consciousness and became a heart-devouring blood centipede. When the heart-devouring blood centipede was mentioned, Kang Shinmu looked around. He still didn't see the tall figure in the crowd. He didn't know where the heart-devouring blood centipede was trapped. It's very likely, Moya said gently. Senior, look over there. Kang Shinmu glanced at the passage at the city gate. As the two spoke, the cracks on the passage deepened. Those cracks seemed to be a type of goo worm. Moya glanced at the passage in front of her. The cracks all over the passage had changed slightly. She couldn't help but think of the scene just now. When the two of them approached the entrance of the ancient desolate city, the crowd finally made way for them. Was it because of that person? But soon, Moya denied it. It couldn't be that person. That person wouldn't come here for a fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art. Then, why did these people make way just now? Goo worm, Moya's words were like enlightenment, and Jiang Shenwu was suddenly enlightened. If those yellow bugs were goo worms, then everything could be explained. There was indeed a type of goo worm that liked to eat human flesh and blood. After the goo worm ate the people that were eaten would become puppets? If that was the case, then General Lang Changhong's troops might all be puppets. Not only that, maybe all the people in the ancient desolate city were puppets. Kang Shinmu focused his mind, wanting to use the power of the 7 devouring devil sealing art to clearly see where these man-eating parasites had come from, how they had spawned, and why they had only gathered at this passage. Kang Shinmu quietly activated the 7 devouring devil sealing art. The moment it opened, Kang Shinmu could clearly see that the number of goo worms in the passageway suddenly increased. It was no exaggeration to say that their numbers had increased exponentially. At the same time, the people near the passage all took a few steps back. This scene was exactly the same as when he and Moya had arrived at the city gate. In Kang Shinmu's mind, a distant and faintly discernible voice suddenly rang out. This is, Moya also heard the same sound. However, what Moya heard was the same as what everyone else heard after taking a few steps back. With an irresistible commanding tone, he asked them to leave the city gate. What Kang Shinmu heard was different from what they heard. Kid, that's not something you deserve. It was an arrogant voice filled with disdain. Ever since Kang Shinmu started cultivating, he had heard a lot of such threatening words. He directly ignored it. A pair of dark eyes continued to stare at the densely packed goo worms in the passageway. Just now, he had deactivated the 7 devouring devil sealing art, and the goo worms no longer increased. Then, Kang Shinmu quietly activated the 7 devouring devil sealing art's inscription again. As expected, the number of goo worms suddenly increased. That's right, the goo worms here were definitely related to his 7 devouring devil sealing art. Wait a minute. Kang Shinmu quickly discovered that there was something strange about these goo worms. At the start, there were too few goo worms. Even with Kang Shinmu's 7 devouring devil sealing art, he could not clearly see the situation of the goo worms. But now, as the number of goo worms increased, Kang Shinmu could see it clearly. Above these goo worms, there was a small black dot. Each of the goo worms carried it. To uncover the true identity of these black dots, Kang Shinmu activated the 7 devouring devil sealing art. Those black dots were the symbols recorded in the 7 devouring devil sealing art. These mysterious man-eating goo worms definitely existed to protect the remnant 7 devouring devil sealing art in the ancient desolate ancient city. The true identity of the mysterious man-eating goo worms was exposed by Kang Shinmu, and at the same time, Kang Shinmu was in trouble. Just now, He activated the 7 devouring devil sealing art and placed himself in the passageway. He could feel the densely packed goo worms crawling up his body and eating away at his flesh and blood. Kang Shinmu. Mo Ya's jade-like hand held onto Kang Shinmu's arm. Senior, Junior is fine. Kang Shinmu had pitch-black dragon scales on his body, so he was not afraid of the man-eating goo worms. The man-eating goo worms tried to bite Kang Shinmu's pitch-black dragon scales, but after a while, they were still unable to bite through the pitch-black dragon scales. Senior, are you alright? Kang Shinmu hurriedly checked on Mo Ya's situation. I'm fine. Mo Ya said gently. Mo Ya's body was surrounded by a layer of faint white halo. It was Mo Ya's holy power. Those goo worms seemed to be afraid of the holy power, and did not dare to approach Mo Ya. Kang Shinmu heaved a sigh of relief. He brought Mo Ya along and stepped on the goo worms as he rushed into the city. The moment he stepped into the city, Kang Shinmu felt the 7 devouring devil sealing arts inscription light up. His soul consciousness had a connection with a certain place in this ancient city. Senior Mo Ya, follow me. The only thing that could resonate with the 7 devouring devil sealing art was the remnant 7 devouring devil sealing art. Following this feeling, he would definitely be able to find the remnant 7 devouring devil sealing art. All right. Mo Ya replied gently. Just as she took a step forward, she seemed to have sensed something, and she turned her head to the right. Strange, I clearly sensed that person's aura, but why is it gone now? After entering desolate ancient city, Mo Ya had a strong feeling that that person had definitely entered desolate ancient city. With that person's personality, he would definitely not come for the remnant 7 devouring devil sealing art. Then, what was his motive for coming to desolate ancient city? After Kang Shinmu and Mo Ya entered desolate ancient city, all the cultivators present were in an uproar. Just a moment ago, the Fu Shui tribe's elder had mysteriously disappeared, and right after, Kang Shinmu and Mo Ya had actually entered the city unscathed. Shui Mo glanced at the passageway before looking at Kang Shinmu, who was in the city. His eyes were filled with greed as he stared at Kang Shinmu's figure. As expected, Kang Shinmu's unique treasure could deal with the goo worms on the passageway. While the goo worms were suppressed by Kang Shinmu, Shui Mo led the Fu Shui tribe's clansmen into desolate ancient city. Aoe only wanted to take revenge for Ao Tong, so he had followed Kang Shinmu all the way to desolate ancient city. He had very little knowledge of desolate ancient city. He could only vaguely feel that there was something strange at the entrance of desolate ancient city, but he did not know that it was caused by goo worms. At this moment, seeing that the Fu Shui tribe had led their clansmen into desolate ancient city, they also led the demon god clan in. Subsequently, the cultivators that had gathered here entered desolate ancient city one after another. Only a few cultivators remained indifferent, as though they were waiting for something. Chapter 56:30. In the crowd, someone noticed a young man in a navy blue gown. It was a middle-aged man in a white gown with short silver hair. Grasshopper? The silver-haired middle-aged man sized up the young man and spoke unhurriedly. What? You're also interested in the seal? This weird tone made Grasshopper extremely unhappy. While speaking, the silver-haired middle-aged man had already arrived in front of Grasshopper. It was unknown whether it was intentional or not, but he happened to stand where Grasshopper was looking at. Or, are you interested in the 7 devouring demon sealing art? The silver-haired middle-aged man glanced at where Grasshopper was looking at, then looked at Grasshopper and laughed mockingly. Shut up. Grasshopper didn't even look at the silver-haired middle-aged man. She withdrew her gaze, threw him a sentence, then turned around and left. He might still be alive. Are you sure you don't want to enter the city? Seeing Grasshopper turn around and leave, the silver-haired middle-aged man asked. Grasshopper's footsteps paused slightly. Seeing Grasshopper stop, the silver-haired middle-aged man revealed a mocking smile. The next moment, Grasshopper's figure disappeared on the spot. Gu Tianza, if you have the time to pay attention to others, think about whether you can leave the secret domain alive. An indifferent voice came from the space not far away, falling into the silver-haired middle-aged man's ears. Grasshopper. Gu Tianzi's face instantly darkened. He stamped his foot, and the passageway at the entrance of the ancient desolate city suddenly collapsed. In a few breaths, the entrance of the ancient desolate city returned to normal. The news of the 7 devouring demon sealing arts fragment in the ancient desolate city was not a secret to the cultivators who entered the secret domain. More and more cultivators rushed to the ancient desolate city. They didn't see the scene of cultivators gathering, nor did they see the passageway, nor did they see Gu Tianzi and Grasshopper. They only saw the entrance of the ancient desolate city open, then stride in. The passageway was destroyed by Gu Tianzi, which meant that the Gu worms on the passageway were also destroyed. In this way, it was a good thing for the cultivators who were rushing over later. Just like that, the cultivators who came later successfully entered the ancient desolate city. Kang Xinmu and Emoya were the third batch of cultivators to enter the ancient desolation ancient city. After entering the ancient desolate city, the subtle feeling in Kang Xinmu's heart deepened. It was as if something was calling out to him. At the same time, the 7 devouring demon sealing art was automatically activated. Kang Xinmu, I feel that those Gu insects should have been affected by your 7 devouring demon sealing art. That's why they appeared. Ever since Emoya came in, she had been paying attention to all the abnormalities in the ancient city. She didn't expect that Kang Xinmu, who was standing beside her, was the one with the most obvious abnormality. It was unknown whether it was because the 7 devouring devil sealing art had been activated or something else, but Kang Xinmu's eyes were suddenly tainted by a burst of black qi, and his eyes suddenly turned black and red. Senior, you're right. Those Gu worms were indeed affected by the 7 devouring demon sealing art. Kang Xinmu also felt a stinging pain in his eyes from time to time. He squinted his eyes and felt a little better before opening them. When he saw the street in front of him, Kang Xinmu was stunned. Emoya's aura was heavy, and she was constantly paying attention to the surroundings. The number of people on the street was far more than what he saw at the city gate. There were also patrolling troops. Batches after batches passed by, repeatedly crossing the street. Emoya was a little distracted as she observed the surroundings, and she almost bumped into a passerby. Kang Xinmu's eyes and hands were sharp, and he hurriedly pulled Emoya back. Kang Xinmu. That person. Emoya, who was pulled back to Kang Xinmu's side, seemed to have sensed something, and she glanced at the passerby. That person's aura isn't right. Emoya's beautiful eyes slightly narrowed, and a white halo flashed in her eyes. Senior Emoya, be careful. With the 7 devouring demon sealing art, Kang Xinmu naturally saw the person who almost bumped into Emoya. It wasn't a person. Of course, it wasn't a puppet either. It was a bug. Not just that person, but the entire street in front of him, every passerby, were all Gu bugs. It's a Gu bug? Emoya suddenly realized. That's right, it's a Gu bug. As they spoke, another patrolling troop passed by the two. Kang Xinmu glanced at them, and found that everyone in this patrol troop was a dried corpse, but they all had the aura of a living person. He could confirm that these people were all heart-devouring blood centipedes. All the heart-devouring blood centipedes' power was concentrated at the location of their hearts. If he didn't look, he wouldn't know, but looking closely, even Kang Xinmu sucked in a breath of cold air. The hearts of these heart-devouring blood centipedes were all alive. Senior Emoya, the hearts of these heart-devouring blood centipedes are all still alive. Kang Xinmu truthfully told Emoya what he saw. In other words, these people are General Leng Changhong's subordinates? Emoya's expression froze, and she made a bold guess. Can we understand that when the ancient martial kingdom and the 10,000 Gu kingdom were fighting, due to some accidents, the ancient martial kingdom was defeated? In order to protect Leng Zhanghong, the ancient martial kingdom announced that Leng Zhanghong had gone missing. General Leng Changhong went to the 10,000 Gu country, and destroyed the 10,000 Gu country with his own strength, and used the 10,000 Gu country's secret technique to resurrect all his dead subordinates. Then, it was the troop that we see now. Mo Ye said gently. Yes, it should be like this. Kang Shinmu agreed with Mo Ye's words. Probably only the 10,000 Gu country's Gu bug secret technique could allow the troops to achieve the goal of eternal life. Not only Lang Changhong's troops, but even the entire ancient desolate city was preserved. Perhaps there was a certain flaw in the Gu bug secret technique that caused the pedestrians in the ancient desolate city to die. The bodies of these dead pedestrians were transformed from Gu worms. Only the patrolling troops, with their hearts still alive, could act like normal people. Senior Amoya, do you know what kind of secret technique this is? Kang Shinmu had no clue about the Gu bug secret technique that could protect the heart. The only thing he knew was the heart-devouring blood centipede's formation. It was the first time he had seen a secret technique that could preserve the heart for 10,000 years. This. I haven't thought of it yet. Mo Ye gently shook her head. Kang Shinmu's eyes stared at the patrolling troops passing by. He could clearly see their hearts beating rhythmically, and each beat emitted the aura of a living person. No. These people's hearts were beating at the same rhythm. Moreover, the direction of their aura seemed to be, Senior Amoya, lower your voice. Kang Shinmu didn't have time to say anything. He grabbed Amoya, jumped, and landed on the roof. As soon as the two of them soared, they saw the troops suddenly arrive at their previous position. Chapter 56-31. Several swords missed, the patrol team paused for a moment. After not finding the target, they continued to patrol along the original route. There was a detail worth pondering. When the patrol team attacked Kang Shinmu, their heartbeat rhythm changed. Everyone's heartbeat was different. When they returned to the patrol route, their heartbeat rhythm returned to the same rhythm. Right now, the 7 devouring demon sealing arts inscription was deactivated. Kang Shinmu could no longer see the patrol team's heartbeat. However, he could still see that all the pedestrians on the street were Gu worms. They looked left and right at the passers-by, and with a glance, they saw that the passerby, who had almost bumped into them, was actually staring straight at them. Kang Shinmu, these pedestrians are not simple. Mo Ye's gaze also landed on the pedestrians. The holy power repelled these pedestrians. Without the 7 devouring demon sealing art, Kang Shinmu's vision was not as good as before. Of course, he could still see ordinary Gu worms and puppets, including the pedestrian, who was staring at them. For some reason, the Gu worms on that person kept moving around his body. Then, that person suddenly disappeared. Kang Shinmu was slightly surprised. This person was formed from Gu worms. There was no possibility of him being devoured by Gu worms. Then, how did this person disappear? Kang Shinmu had not completely grasped the 7 devouring demon sealing arts inscription. After the 7 devouring demon sealing art fused into his eyes, he could only use the power of his eyes and the additional power of the 7 devouring demon sealing art. He could not open the 7 devouring demon sealing arts inscription as he wished. After the inscription closed, Kang Shinmu could not open it now. After trying for a while, he still could not open the inscription. This must be related to the grade of the 7 devouring demon sealing arts inscription. After all, it was only the power of law formed from the fusion of the 2 supreme god powers of the 1,000-winged serpent clan elder. It was not pure power of law. After absorbing this power of law, the 7 devouring demon sealing arts inscription could barely stabilize one realm. When the seal closed, Kang Shinmu's eyes looked the same as usual. If the mark of the 7 devouring devil sealing art was opened, the mark of the 7 devouring devil sealing art would appear in Kang Shinmu's eyes. Only a very small part of the engraving. But every time the 7 devouring devil sealing art was activated, a phantom image would flash by. Kang Shinmu roughly knew what the complete inscription of the 7 devouring devil sealing art was. It was an ancient rune. For the time being, he did not know what it meant. Kang Shinmu and Emoya were standing on high ground, so they could see very far. On the street not far away, pedestrians came and went. Unlike the pedestrians here, the pedestrians on the street not far away looked normal. Kang Shinmu also saw some familiar faces. He was none other than the Talisman clan elder who had followed Daoist Shou Yang in. That person had already been devoured by the man-eating goo. What appeared in the city now was naturally a puppet formed by the goo. But what surprised Kang Shinmu was, while he was sizing up the Talisman clan elder, that person suddenly raised his head and looked in his direction. Kang Shinmu clearly saw a cold glint flash across his eyes. Was he still alive? In the blink of an eye, the Talisman clan elder continued walking forward like the pedestrians earlier. It was as if nothing had happened just now. With Kang Shinmu's current abilities, he naturally could not have been mistaken. Kang Shinmu looked in the direction that the Talisman clan elder had left and saw many pedestrians also walking in that direction. Among them were many cultivators who had entered the city later. Over there, Kang Shinmu looked in a farther direction. He could only see a dense crowd. They were all moving toward the city center. Kang Shinmu, should we go take a look? Emoya suddenly asked. Senior, I have a feeling that something is wrong over there. Kang Shinmu could not put his finger on what was wrong, but he just felt that something was amiss. Ever since he had entered the city, he had a strange feeling in his heart. It was probably the connection between the fragments of the 7 devouring demons sealing art. But the connection between the fragments and the pedestrians and the cultivators were heading in the opposite direction. Perhaps there is an answer to the mystery of the ancient city over there, Emoya said gently. All right. Kang Shinmu weighed his options and decided to do as Senior Emoya said. The connection between him and the fragment was very weak. He could only vaguely sense a direction, but it did not mean that the fragment was in that direction. The two of them flew in the direction where the crowd was gathered. But before they could take a few steps, they were suddenly stopped by a patrol team that appeared in front of them. What kind of patrol team is patrolling the rooftops? Kang Shinmu was very puzzled. Kang Shinmu, don't just stand there, Emoya gently reminded Kang Shinmu. Kang Shinmu responded. Seeing the patrol team charging toward them, he hurriedly moved away. At this time, the rooftops were filled with the figures of the patrol team. Moreover, the patrol team seemed to have a purpose. Clearly, they were coming for the two of them. Senior, I don't think we can go through the roof. Let's go down first. Kang Shinmu patted the air a few times, knocking down the soldiers blocking the way. Then, he and Emoya jumped down together. As soon as their feet touched the ground, a figure suddenly pounced on them. Jiang Shenwu decisively threw out a punch, sending the person who was charging at him flying. Looking at his clothes, he was the pedestrian, who had almost bumped into Emoya. After that, pedestrian fell to the ground, his body suddenly exploded and disappeared. No, no. Suddenly, the deep voice of an old man rang out. Daoist Shou Yang walked over from the side. Kang Shinmu and Emoya hadn't seen Daoist Shou Yang for a while, but the latter's temperament had undergone a huge change. When he was the first to enter the ancient Desolation City, he gave off a frivolous air. Every move he made showed his disdain for the passageway leading to the ancient Desolation City. But now, Daoist Shou Yang seemed to have aged a lot in an instant, and he had become much steadier. His voice, in particular, seemed to have weathered the vicissitudes of life. Senior. Kang Shinmu cupped his fists toward Daoist Shou Yang. Emoya nodded at Daoist Shou Yang. Young man, leave the city as soon as possible. Daoist Shou Yang's gaze fell on Kang Shinmu. After staring at Kang Shinmu for a long while, he slowly spoke. Kang Shinmu didn't understand what Daoist Shou Yang meant. Without saying anything else, Daoist Shou Yang turned and left. Senior, I don't know what you mean by that. Kang Shinmu pursed his lips and asked. Chapter 5632. Kang Shinmu was taken aback by Daoist Shou Yang's sudden words. Kang Shinmu's pupils constricted as he stared at Daoist Shou Yang in front of him. A smile suddenly emerged on Daoist Shou Yang's wrinkled old face. In Kang Shinmu's eyes, the smile was somewhat strange. Daoist Shou Yang smiled meaningfully, then his gaze suddenly fell on Kang Shinmu's eyes. A dark gleam flashed across them. Kang Shinmu's eyes were different from before, so he could clearly see what the dark gleam that flashed across Daoist Shou Yang's eyes was. It was an extremely obscure black mist. When he sensed the black mist, the subtle connection between Kang Shinmu and the 7 devouring demon sealing art emerged once again. He was puzzled. Could it be that Daoist Shou Yang had already obtained the fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art that existed in the primordial antiquity city? Don't overthink it, boy. I didn't obtain the fragment. As if he had seen through Kang Shinmu's thoughts, Daoist Shou Yang withdrew his gaze and said in a hoarse voice. Kang Shinmu did not know whether he should believe Daoist Shou Yang's words. Given Daoist Shou Yang's qualifications and abilities, there was no need for him to lie to a junior. However, he clearly sensed the subtle connection between him and the fragment just now. I advise you to stop searching for the 7 devouring demon sealing art and leave this ancient city as soon as possible, Daoist Shou Yang added. Kang Shinmu was even more confused. Senior, it is no longer a secret that there is a fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art in the primordial antiquity city. More and more cultivators will come for it. Kang Shinmu's words made his attitude clear. Daoist Shou Yang naturally understood. Kang Shinmu, do you know that my original goal was the 10 Directions Devil Seal? Daoist Shou Yang suddenly said. Kang Shinmu was not surprised at all. Not to mention Daoist Shou Yang, even if the demon god Talisman Water Clan told him the same thing, he would believe it. After all, he had already revealed the Extreme 10 Directional Devil Seal in the previous battle. The Extreme 10 Directional Devil Seal was a sacred item of heaven and earth. Obtaining such an artifact would greatly benefit one's cultivation. I originally thought that a cultivator with a heaven and earth saint grade would have half a foot in the gate of laws. I never expected you to be so weak. While saying that, Daoist Shou Yang turned around and walked toward an empty alley. I had originally planned to slowly take you down after entering the city, but I didn't expect the 7 devouring demon sealing art to be. Daoist Shou Yang's voice grew softer and softer. The person was clearly not far in front of them, but his voice was so soft that it was almost inaudible. Kang Shinmu hesitated for a moment before he also took a step forward. But before his feet could touch the ground, he saw Daoist Shou Yang's figure suddenly disappear. Even when Daoist Shou Yang disappeared, Kang Shinmu did not hear his last words. Is the 7 devouring demon sealing art? What? Kang Shinmu was puzzled. What was Daoist Shou Yang trying to say? Suddenly, Kang Shinmu saw a wisp of black smoke flash past the spot where Daoist Shou Yang had disappeared. Kang Shinmu dashed to the spot where the wisp of black smoke had appeared and reached out to grab it. A bone-piercing cold suddenly assaulted him, entering his meridians through his palm and spreading throughout his body. Just as it was about to enter Kang Shinmu's sea of consciousness, the supreme divine flame suddenly spread out and expelled the cold aura. Jiang Shenwu opened his palm. His palm was empty. There was nothing there at all. Not even a trace of black smoke was left behind. Mo Ye walked over at that moment. She bent down slightly and touched the spot where Daoist Shou Yang had been standing with her slender hand. This seems to be a secret art of the 10,000 Gu Kingdom. She stared at the wisps of black smoke in her hand. Only then did Kang Shinmu notice that the ground was full of the black smoke. However, the black gas only remained for a short while before disappearing completely. Mo Ye thought for a moment and said gently, "It seems to be the 10,000 Gu art." The method used to refine the heart-devouring blood centipede is the one passed down from the 10,000 Gu Kingdom and later adapted by the later generations. She looked up at Kang Shinmu and said, "Part of it comes from the 10,000 Gu art." "Senior, I told you that the heart-devouring blood centipede is not a good thing," Kang Shinmu said righteously. Moya looked at Kang Shinmu, who had suddenly become serious, and chuckled with her hand covering her mouth. Daoist Shou Yang's last words had become a mystery. Just like how he had suddenly fallen into such dire straits, there was no answer. Given Daoist Shou Yang's cultivation, he had probably stepped into the gate of laws. However, after entering the ancient desolation ancient city, he was no longer in high spirits. His entire temperament changed, and his entire body exuded an aura of death. In the end, he did not survive. This ancient desolation ancient city was not a simple puppet city. Senior Moya, let's go out first. Kang Shinmu weighed the pros and cons for a long time, but he still felt that there was no need to risk his life. With his current strength, it would be difficult for him to deal with some of the cultivators in the city, let alone an unknown existence that could defeat Daoist Shou Yang. More importantly, Senior Moya was here, so he could not be impulsive. Okay. Moya approved of Kang Shinmu's decision. She admitted that Kang Shinmu was talented and had devouring power, so it would not be a problem for him to deal with the cultivators who had entered the ancient desolation ancient city. However, the ancient desolation ancient city was full of mysteries. For every cultivator, the path of cultivation was never smooth sailing. It could be said that they were risking their lives to cultivate. If they risked their lives, then cultivation would lose its meaning. In the end, Kang Shinmu and Moya chose to leave the ancient desolation ancient city. The two followed the route they came from and arrived at the city gate. However, they found that the gate was closed, and no cultivators entered the city. The two walked around the city wall, but they did not find an exit. Not only that, but even the entrance of the city had disappeared during this trip. The entire ancient desolation ancient city was surrounded by a wall. Are the two of you also here for the fragment of the 7 devouring demons sealing art? Seeing Kang Shinmu and Moya lingering at the city gate, someone could not help but ask curiously. Kang Shinmu did not say anything. Although Kang Shinmu did not answer, the cultivators present were well aware of it. Anyone who entered the ancient desolation ancient city was here for the fragment of the 7 devouring demons sealing art. The fragment of the 7 devouring demons sealing art is about to appear, so the ancient desolation ancient city will naturally be closed. Someone in the crowd said. Oh, right. The ancient desolation ancient city only has an entrance, no exit. After saying that, that person left in a hurry. No exit? Then how do we leave? A surprised voice suddenly sounded in the crowd, indicating that not everyone knew that the ancient desolation ancient city did not have an exit. The cultivators who had gathered here suddenly fell into chaos. You want to leave the ancient desolation ancient city? Wait until we see the city lord, then we will naturally know. Chapter 56-33. Kang Shinmu looked over, but he couldn't find the person who spoke. The man casually tossed out these words, causing the surrounding atmosphere to change once again. All the cultivators who heard these words had different expressions and reactions. For a moment, the topic of the cultivators gathered nearby was the city lord of the ancient desolation ancient city. Regardless of whether the ancient desolation ancient city had a city lord or not, Kang Shinmu and Moya couldn't leave the ancient desolation ancient city now. The two of them thought for a moment and chose to follow the cultivators to observe the situation. When I came here, I never heard of any city lord of the ancient desolation ancient city. Didn't you notice that the bustling scene in the city is very strange? Along the way, Kang Shinmu and Moya could hear the cultivators beside them talking to each other. I saw it long ago. These pedestrians are all puppets, and there aren't many living people in the patrolling troops. Even if there are, they are most likely heart-devouring blood centipedes. The one who spoke was a red-haired young man with a spear on his back. The red-haired young man was standing on a roof at the side. After he was stopped by the patrolling troops on the roof, he jumped off the roof. He flicked his bangs and revealed his white teeth. He said confidently, "You are all supreme cultivators, and all of you have supreme divine power level 8 or above. How can you not see the details? What he said was right, but his tone was more or less arrogant, which made some of the cultivators unhappy. Kid, aren't your words a little too absolute? You can't see the abnormality, but we can naturally see it. Please don't generalize. Someone immediately refuted the red-haired young man. The red-haired young man didn't care about these people's aggressive words and continued to stride forward. When he passed by Kang Shinmu and Amoya, he stopped for a moment. You are that Jiang. Jiang something from the Dragon God clan. The red-haired young man's tone was as disdainful as it could be. His provocation of Kang Shinmu also made some of the cultivators stop. Jiang Shenwu had massacred the demon god race, the talisman water race, the thousand-winged snake race, and many other prominent races, including the elders of the demon god race, talisman water race, and thousand-winged snake race. It could be said that most of the cultivators who came to the desolate ancient city this time were here for Kang Shinmu. However, the fragment of the seven devouring devil sealing art had yet to appear, so no one took action. As for the red-haired youth, it was a human youth called Tang Xiaoyu. No one knew where he came from or where he was going. They knew very little about Tang Xiaoyu, but Tang Xiaoyu was not someone who knew his place. Wherever there was chaos, there would be him. He could always appear in all kinds of secret realms at the right time. As a matter of fact, Tang Xiaoyu came when the sealed mystery land appeared. Tang Xiaoyu was arrogant, and he had offended many famous sects and families. In a way, the degree of his hatred was much higher than that of Kang Shinmu. After all, Tang Xiaoyu even dared to offend the dragon god race, where Kang Shinmu was from. From his current words, it could be seen that he did not take Kang Shinmu seriously at all. Although Kang Shinmu had just entered the Supreme Superior state not long ago, and judging from his posture, the supreme divine power that he had mastered was not strong, he was able to come to the desolate ancient city. Tang Xiaoyu's move was undoubtedly to offend all the cultivators who entered the desolate ancient city. Tang Xiaoyu, how dare you appear here? Tang Xiaoyu's appearance instantly attracted the attention of many people, and his enemies came looking for him. Let's see where you can run this time. As long as there was a common enemy, it was an alliance. Many cultivators who did not know each other initially gathered together and rushed towards Tang Xiaoyu, forming an encirclement. Facing this situation, Tang Xiaoyu did not take it to heart at all. He tapped his head with one hand leisurely, and his eyeballs kept rolling, as if he was thinking about what Kang Shinmu's name was. Kang Shinmu. Tang Xiaoyu's slightly provocative words did not have any effect on Kang Shinmu. His thin lips moved slightly, and he spoke faintly. His calm and indifferent attitude suppressed Tang Xiaoyu in terms of momentum. Yes, Kang Shinmu. Tang Xiaoyu laughed heartily when he heard that. He stood in front of Kang Shinmu, looked Kang Shinmu up and down, and said, I heard that you have the method to make the heart-devouring blood centipede, and you also refined Elder Ao Tong of the demon god race into the heart-devouring blood centipede, which is very powerful. I wonder if you can share the refining method? Although Tang Xiaoyu asked, the key point was that he was still smiling cheekily. Just looking at it made people want to beat him up. The most surprising thing was that Tang Xiaoyu really dared to say it. Wasn't he afraid that he would die here? His words also made more people pay attention to Jiang Shenwu, who was in this place. Tang Xiaoyu, who was originally the focus of attention, instantly turned to Kang Shinmu. Especially when there were people from the demon god race not far away. The atmosphere suddenly became tense. Didn't you teach me this? Kang Shinmu looked at Tang Xiaoyu and said faintly. As soon as he said that, the smile on Tang Xiaoyu's face froze. Tang Xiaoyu did not expect Kang Shinmu to say that. After holding it in for a long time, he could not say a word. As more and more cultivators gathered around, Tang Xiaoyu tiptoed and soared into the sky. Stop him. They had finally caught Tang Xiaoyu. How could they let him go just like that? In an instant, the street was filled with martial arts techniques. Even so, the crowd could not stop Tang Xiaoyu. The others did not see it, but Kang Shinmu saw it. The moment Tang Xiaoyu's figure soared into the sky, or even a moment before that, his aura disappeared. Then, his figure disappeared in the space. As the crowd blocked Tang Xiaoyu, Kang Xinmu and Mo Ya also left the street. Kang Xinmu, the movement technique that the young man named Tang Xiaoyu used seems familiar, Mo Ya said gently after thinking for a while. I seem to have seen it somewhere before. Kang Xinmu had encountered many opponents along the way and had seen all kinds of martial arts techniques and movement techniques. Tang Xiaoyu's space movement technique was very special, but it was not that he had not seen it before. It looks like the movement technique of someone from Sky Yuan Palace. Mo Ya recalled Tang Xiaoyu's movement technique and remembered a description she had seen in an ancient book. Sky Yuan Palace? To Kang Xinmu, this was another unfamiliar word. Yes, Sky Yuan Palace. Mo Ya's lily-white hand formed a seal. Then, a jade slip appeared. Take a look. Mo Ya erased the seal on the jade slip and handed it to Kang Xinmu. Kang Xinmu used his soul consciousness to check and had a rough understanding of Sky Yuan Palace. However, the description of Sky Yuan Palace in the jade slip was based on the narration of others. There was a movement technique that was specially marked. Chapter 56-34. Mo Ya blinked her beautiful eyes and looked at Kang Xinmu, waiting for him to continue. As expected, I have never heard of it. Who would have thought that Kang Xinmu would suddenly say such a thing? Mo Ya, Senior, it's not that I am ignorant, but my knowledge is limited, and I need more practice. Kang Xinmu smiled. This movement technique will be of great help when you use the black dragon scales in battle. Mo Ya pursed her lips and said gently. Senior, you are right, but where should I find it? This was undoubtedly a difficult problem for Kang Xinmu. He couldn't possibly snatch it from Tang Xiaoyu, right? However, after thinking about it carefully, it was not impossible. Mo Ya only saw that Kang Xinmu seemed to have made up his mind and found a direction to move forward. She was a little confused, but also a little relieved. Ancient wilderness, ancient city, city center. To everyone's surprise, this was not a palace or a square, but a desert area. No one would have thought that the city center of ancient wilderness, ancient city was actually a wasteland. At this time, the residents of ancient wilderness, ancient city gathered on the wasteland, and there were patrolling troops passing by from time to time. Cultivators who came to ancient wilderness, ancient city also arrived one after another. The three parties seemed to have made some kind of agreement, and their positions were very particular. The residents of ancient wilderness, ancient city stood in the innermost layer of the wasteland. They seemed to be waiting for the arrival of a certain sacred moment. Their expressions were solemn, and their pair of lifeless eyes stared at the right side of the wasteland. Following the residents of ancient wilderness, ancient city were the many cultivators who entered the city. The outermost layer was the patrolling troops of ancient wilderness, ancient city. So far, there were a total of 10 teams. These 10 teams could be said to be illogical and disorderly. They would go wherever they wanted to, but they would never touch the cultivators who entered the city. Everything seemed very calm. Kang Xinmu and Mo Ya came a little later, and there was still some distance from the wasteland. Looking at the route of the patrolling troops, there should be 2 teams passing by here. However, when the patrolling troops passed by, they would avoid Kang Xinmu and Mo Ya. His attitude towards Kang Xinmu and Mo Ya was completely different from when he met them on the street. This made people wonder if the 10 patrol teams had received orders from someone and were ready to go. As time passed, dusk fell. During this period of time, the residents of the ancient desolate city were still looking at the right side of the desert. They did not intend to look away, nor did they have any intention of leaving. The 10 patrol teams' seemingly messy patrolling routes also began to reveal their fixed routes. All these signs indicated that they had received orders from someone. The 3 parties maintained a state of harmony on the surface. Until, suddenly, there was a strange movement. The source of the sound was surprisingly the place where the residents of the ancient desolate city were located in the innermost area of the desert. Kang Shinmu looked toward the source of the voice and saw the innermost residents of the ancient desolate city kneeling on the ground. No. Not prostrating. Looking at the way he fell to the ground, it seemed more like he had fainted. Could it be that night had fallen and the goo worms had lost their activity? Kang Shinmu, watch your step. Just as Kang Shinmu was pondering why those residents fell to the ground, he heard Moya's voice. He quickly focused his attention and glanced at the right side where those residents had been staring at for a long time. Besides the sky being dark, there seemed to be nothing unusual. If only a few residents were staring at that direction, it would be fine. The problem was that all the residents were staring at that direction, which meant that it was not an ordinary place. Now that all the residents of the ancient desolate city had fallen to the ground, it was time for the controller to appear, right? Boom! Suddenly, there was an explosion in the crowd of cultivators. The crowd of cultivators was suddenly in an uproar. However, they were not discussing anything. Instead, the patrol teams in the periphery of the desert suddenly rushed toward the cultivators and launched an indiscriminate attack. As for the sudden explosion, it was the patrol team's attack. With a wave of their hands, the ground collapsed inch by inch. When Kang Shinmu noticed the chaotic scene, the desert had already collapsed. The ground collapsed, and those residents of the ancient desolate city also fell to the ground. The cultivators in the area all dashed away. However, there were still many cultivators who were brought to the hollow area below by the patrol team. The city master has appeared. A familiar voice came again. In such a chaotic moment, Tang Xiaoyu appeared again. However, Tang Xiaoyu's appearance was somewhat disheveled. His clothes were tattered and stained with blood. There were also bloodstains on his face, and the aura that leaked out from his body was chaotic. He looked like he had gone through a huge battle, as if he had just survived a disaster. The shout of, "The city master has appeared," just now came from Tang Xiaoyu. Tang Xiaoyu used his extraordinary body movement to avoid the patrol team's attack. After landing, before Tang Xiaoyu could heave a sigh of relief, he saw Kang Shinmu staring at him. What a coincidence. When Tang Xiaoyu saw Kang Shinmu, he was stunned at first, but then he grinned brightly. Kang Shinmu smiled without saying a word. I just remembered that I have something to do. I'll leave first. Tang Xiaoyu smiled on the surface, but he was cursing inwardly. When he came here, he had used Kang Shinmu to distract his enemies. He did not expect to see Kang Shinmu again so soon. Now, no one can get out. Kang Shinmu smiled meaningfully. I have something to do in the city. Tang Xiaoyu's body stiffened. I think all the cultivators are gathered here. Kang Shinmu crossed his arms, looking at Tang Xiaoyu with a teasing look. I know. I have something to do, not looking for someone. Tang Xiaoyu braced himself and said, then quickened his pace. As he walked, he released his soul consciousness to check on Kang Shinmu's movements. When he saw that Kang Shinmu did not chase after him, he hurriedly hid in the crowd. Aren't you going to chase after him? Moya's pretty face was smiling, her voice gentle. Senior, you sound like I'm going to chase after someone I like. Kang Shinmu felt a little awkward. I don't think so. Moya covered her mouth and smiled. Kang Shinmu had always thought that he was not a gentleman, but he was not the kind of person who would take advantage of others' misfortune. He was not in a hurry to understand the 10,000 elephants origin folding technique. Moreover, he did not have the time to deal with Tang Xiaoyu. The sky on the right side of the desolate ancient city, which had been stared at by all the residents, was still normal. However, the ground below was abnormal. Soon, a 3-meter-tall palace rose from the space below. Chapter 56-35. Since the City Lord's mansion had appeared, it seemed that the City Lord was indeed going to appear. To be able to control an entire ancient city full of puppets, the City Lord must not be an ordinary person. Kang Shinmu's eyes had experienced the tempering of the 7 devouring demon sealing art, and could see things that ordinary people could not see. The city lord's mansion's palace in front of him seemed to be only 1 zhang tall, but it was actually a spatial artifact. As for what kind of artifact it was, he might have to be there to find out. After the city lord's mansion appeared, it occupied the empty space on the ground. At this moment, the surrounding patrolling troops suddenly disappeared. The palace's door slowly opened. Looking in from the outside, one could only see pitch-black darkness. Kang Xinmu's gaze was fixed on the pitch-black palace. The more he looked, the more he felt that the pitch-black space was familiar. Especially the subtle connection with the 7 devouring demons sealing art, it appeared again. Could it be that the fragment of the 7 devouring demons sealing art was in this palace? The ground began to shake violently, and even the space around them was shaking. Kang Xinmu's sharp senses sensed that this sudden vibration should be the secret realm moving. One must know that this was a moving secret realm. If the secret realm was moving at this time, then leaving the secret realm might be far away from the dragon demon cave. As for where they would end up, this was an unknown mystery. All the cultivators present were the cream of the crop among supreme-level cultivators. Faced with the constantly shaking space, they quickly figured out what was going on. The secret realm is actually moving again. A long sigh sounded. Then, a voice full of resentment rang out, "This is bad, it wasn't easy to get rid of those suckers, and now we're going to meet again." This was supposed to be a very common complaint. But at this moment, it seemed extremely special. At first glance, there was nothing wrong with this person's words. But if one thought about it carefully, one would realize that there was a profound meaning behind this person's words. He knew where the secret realm was about to appear. Kang Xinmu searched the crowd for the person who spoke. Very quickly, he locked onto a young man. The young man was dressed very ordinarily, and he looked like a passerby. In terms of appearance, there was nothing special about him, the kind that could not be picked out in a crowd. "Heis, what kind of sin have I committed?" When Kang Xinmu locked onto the young man's right hand was rubbing his tightly furrowed brows and sighing again and again. It wasn't just Kang Xinmu. Even the cultivators around the young man had noticed him and were sizing him up. The young man seemed to have noticed the gazes of the surrounding people, and he put away his distressed expression. "I wish you all good luck. I shall not disturb you any further." With that, the young man disappeared on the spot. Kang Xinmu's pupils shrank. Wasn't this young man using the manifestation origin superposition technique? Moreover, he was much more familiar with the manifestation origin stacking technique compared to Tang Xiaoyu. Thinking back to what the young man had said, the next place the secret realm would appear might be where the heavenly Yuan Palace was. It's the manifestation origin superposition technique? There was no lack of experienced and knowledgeable cultivators who quickly recognized the manifestation origin stacking technique that the young man had performed. Is he from the heavenly Yuan Palace? Didn't they say that the heavenly Yuan Palace had disappeared with the extraterritorial devil dragons? How could they possibly appear here? Immediately, someone raised the question. How many years ago was that? Kang Xinmu had also obtained a lot of information about the heavenly Yuan Palace from the conversations of these cultivators. Of course, he also heard the words, extraterritorial devil dragons. As a member of the Dragon God clan, Kang Xinmu more or less knew about the deeds of the ancestors in the clan. One of the ancestors who had gone out to train and then disappeared had come into contact with the extraterritorial devil dragons. Therefore, Kang Xinmu was not unfamiliar with the words, extraterritorial devil dragons. It was just that he did not expect that the extraterritorial devil dragons would have a certain connection with the heavenly Yuan Palace. I have a question. Can we leave the desolate ancient city by performing the manifestation origin stacking technique? Suddenly, there was an untimely question. Kang Xinmu raised his eyebrows when he heard the question. Then, his eyes quickly locked on the figure of the person who came. Tang Xiaoyu had clearly seen that Kang Xinmu was not here, so he asked this question. But he did not expect that Kang Xinmu was still here. Not only that, the distance between him and Kang Shinmu seemed to be narrowing. Is there a need to ask? Using the manifestation origin stacking technique, we can definitely leave the desolate ancient city. But, except for you. Although everyone recognized that the person who asked the question was Tang Xiaoyu, they still answered Tang Xiaoyu's question enthusiastically. It was a clear female voice. Why would you ask such a stupid question? The person who answered Tang Xiaoyu was a woman in a black dress. The woman curled her lips into an evil smile, shook the whip in her hand, and stared at Tang Xiaoyu with a pair of bright eyes. Gufeng, I think the stupid person is you. Based on your ability, how would you know the mystery of the manifestation origin stacking technique? Tang Xiaoyu was somewhat embarrassed when the woman questioned him in front of everyone, so he immediately retorted. The woman called Gufeng nodded when she heard this. Indeed, I overestimated you. With your ability, of course, you can't understand the mystery of the manifestation origin stacking technique. Gufeng, didn't anyone tell you that when a lady goes out to train, she should know how to control her princess temperament at home? Tang Xiaoyu gritted his teeth and said in a low voice. I'm so scared when you say that. Gufeng followed Tang Xiaoyu's words, and while responding, she also cooperated with him and made a frightened expression. You're really pretentious. Tang Xiaoyu glanced at Gufeng with a face full of disdain. As he spoke, his figure disappeared from where he was. At the same time, Gufeng took a step to the side, and the whip in her hands suddenly lashed out. Kang Shinmu's expression froze. This woman had some tricks. Don't come out and embarrass yourself with these little tricks of yours. Hurry up and hand over the thing, and I'll spare your life. Gufeng's voice instantly turned cold, and the whip in her hands suddenly pulled, pulling Tang Xiaoyu back. I've said it 800 times, I didn't take it. Even if you invited your father here, I still didn't take it. Tang Xiaoyu's face was full of helplessness. He seemed to be completely unsurprised that Gufeng could pull him back from the manifestation origin stacking technique. However, even though he was tied up by Gufeng's whip, his expression was still calm, and his tone was neither fast nor slow. To deal with a clown like you, there's no need for my father to do it himself. Gufeng suddenly lashed the whip. Two intertwined flood dragons, one black and one white, flashed on the whip. With a fierce momentum, they approached Tang Xiaoyu. You so-called aristocrats really disgust the way you do things, Tang Xiaoyu said indifferently, easily resolving Gufeng's attack. At the same time, Tang Xiaoyu's figure appeared next to Kang Shinmu. He seemed to be very familiar with Kang Shinmu, as he ignored Kang Shinmu's cold warning gaze and patted Kang Shinmu's shoulder. Chapter 56-36. Tang Xiaoyu used the manifestation origin superposition technique next to Kang Shinmu, completely exposing his whereabouts to Kang Shinmu's eyes. The manifestation origin superposition technique was a movement technique, and it was currently the only space-type movement technique. When Tang Xiaoyu used the manifestation origin superposition technique just now, a door opened in the space beside him. There were 3 layers of space inside the door, and Tang Xiaoyu entered one of them. Kang Shinmu memorized the path of these 3 layers of space, and roughly estimated the location of the exit. Just like the 3 layers of space that appeared, there would be 3 landing points. One of them would be Tang Xiaoyu's landing point, and the other 2 were not for the purpose of confusion, but the landing points that he might reach in a short period of time. This was the essence of origin superposition. Tang Xiaoyu's figure appeared in one of the 3 places that Kang Shinmu predicted, but it was not the first place that Kang Shinmu had guessed. As for the other 2 spots that were supposed to be his landing spots, there were no spatial fluctuations. This was because Tang Xiaoyu had stacked the 3 layers of space together when he teleported. Tang Xiaoyu's manifestation origin superposition technique seemed to be full of flaws, but it could stack 3 layers of space in an instant, so it should not be underestimated. Tang Xiaoyu, do you mean that the thing that you stole is on him? Gufeng's eyes narrowed, and she sized up Kang Shinmu suspiciously. Just him? Kang Shinmu gave Gufeng a very bad impression. Whether it was his appearance, clothes, or the aura that leaked out, all aspects were extremely shabby. While Gufeng was sizing up Kang Shinmu, Tang Xiaoyu had already left. Kang Shinmu's eyes were fixed on Tang Xiaoyu's figure the whole time. There was a certain distance between him and Tang Xiaoyu just now, and he could only faintly see that there were 4 layers of space in the space that Tang Xiaoyu had opened. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Seeing that Kang Shinmu was ignoring her, Gufeng frowned and waved her whip at Kang Shinmu. Kang Shinmu was just about to dodge when he saw Moya suddenly stretch out her lily-white hand and accurately grab the unpredictable whip. "Little girl, didn't your family teach you to respect your elder brothers?" Even though Moya's voice was gentle, her beautiful eyes contained an unquestionable dignity. "Who are you?" Gufeng turned to look at Moya when she heard that. After sizing him up, he frowned. Not only was the woman dressed very plainly, but she also gave off the feeling that she was sick. How could such a weak person dare to shout at her? "Which clan are you from? How dare you speak to me in such a tone? Do you know who I am?" Gufeng glanced at Moya disdainfully and walked towards Kang Shinmu. Compared to the weak woman, Tang Xiaoyu's eldest brother looked extraordinarily heroic. The aura that leaked out from his body was very ethereal, giving off an unfathomable feeling. "Hand it over." Gufeng narrowed her eyes and stood facing Kang Shinmu. "Young lady, you are so rude." Faced with Gufeng, who did not distinguish right from wrong, Moya frowned. "You shut up." Gufeng waved her hand and swung her whip at Moya. Kang Shinmu leaned to the side and reached out to grab Gufeng's whip. "I haven't settled the score with you yet, and you dare to retaliate?" Gufeng raised her eyebrows and glared at Kang Shinmu. She muttered some incantation and the whip suddenly wrapped around Kang Shinmu. Kang Shinmu secretly exerted force and pulled the whip hard, flinging Gufeng to the side. At this moment, Gufeng sensed the tyrannical level of Kang Shinmu's cultivation. His supreme divine power was barely at the 6th level. Compared to that good-for-nothing Tang Xiaoyu, he was still a long way off. Trying to be a hero and save a damsel in distress. Why don't you see if you have the ability to do so? Gufeng stomped on the air and steadied herself. She took the opportunity to change her target to Kang Shinmu. Kang Shinmu immediately released the supreme soul power. The supreme power of the soul instantly swept towards Gufeng, locking her whip and changing the direction of the whip's attack. When Gufeng swung her whip, the whip almost wrapped around herself. She retracted her whip in time and avoided a mistake. Of course, Gufeng was not weak. She had been hit just now because she had underestimated her opponent. Not only did she look down on Moya, but she also looked down on Kang Shinmu, who stood up for Moya. "I couldn't tell that you actually cultivated the supreme soul power." Gufeng naturally recognized Kang Shinmu's supreme soul power and was slightly surprised. "Don't touch her." Kang Shinmu glanced at Gufeng coldly and said in a cold voice. He didn't care what they said, but he definitely could not say anything about Senior Moya. "I will touch whoever I want to touch. It's not your place to point fingers at a nobody like you." Gufeng's voice was sharp. She waved her hand and the long crimson whip appeared in her hand again. Her unruly and domineering behavior was seen by every cultivator present. Among them, many cultivators who had entered the mystic realm long ago had heard of Gufeng's deeds. It was no exaggeration to say that wherever Gufeng went, she would snatch it. As long as she had her eyes on something, she would definitely snatch it, regardless of the means. There were also people who had fought with Gufeng and were unhappy with her, but there was nothing they could do. The cultivators who had interacted with Gufeng knew that she had been chasing after Tang Xiaoyu from Heavenly Yuan Palace. Since she dared to offend people from Heavenly Yuan Palace, Gufeng must have an extraordinary background. "Wait, your name is Kang Shinmu, right?" Gufeng recognized Kang Shinmu. "You have the Heaven and Earth Saint Grade Supreme Devil Seal and you still dare to show off." She did not hide her thoughts at all and her words were full of disdain. Very few people knew that Kang Shinmu had the Heaven and Earth Saint Grade Supreme Devil Seal in his possession. Now that Gufeng had exposed it in front of so many people, Kang Shinmu was in a lot of trouble. The people around them had already turned their attention to Kang Shinmu and were discussing something. Tang Xiaoyu, who had originally escaped, had returned from the crowd. He happened to hear Gufeng's words. Gufeng was planning on snatching Kang Shinmu's Heaven and Earth Saint Grade Supreme Devil Seal. Nothing could happen to this brat right now. Are all the people from the Boundless sect this rude? Tang Xiaoyu squeezed through the crowd and stood in front of Gufeng. Tang Xiaoyu, you still dare to come back? Gufeng's eyebrows jumped as she laughed mockingly. Why wouldn't I dare to come back? Tang Xiaoyu glanced at Gufeng strangely. He turned around and gave Kang Shinmu a look, indicating for him to take Imoya away. Kang Shinmu didn't stand on ceremony. He took Imoya with him and left the street. Hand over what you stole from my house. Gufeng was the first to object to Kang Shinmu's request to leave. Is there something wrong with your brain? I'm the one who stole from your house. Why are you looking for me? Tang Xiaoyu stared at Gufeng, speechless. Suddenly, he realized that he had said something wrong and corrected himself. No, I took it openly. If you stole it, you stole it. Don't make it sound so righteous. Gufeng lashed out with her whip at Tang Xiaoyu. Once I'm done with you, I'll go find that Kang Shinmu and settle the score. Tang Xiaoyu easily dodged Gufeng's whip. You can't hit me, right? Chapter 56-37. Gufeng's figure followed the direction of the whip and disappeared. What a crazy woman. Tang Xiaoyu was stunned by Gufeng's actions. Before entering the city, this woman had stolen the Chunyu family's demonic spirit zither from Chunyu Pan, and now she was eyeing Kang Shinmu's extreme 10-directional devil seal. What a thief. Kang Shinmu and Imoya avoided the crowd and temporarily maintained a certain distance from the city lord's residence. Kang Shinmu and Imoya were facing the entrance of the city lord's residence, so they could vaguely see the mysteries of the city lord's residence. The 7 devouring demon sealing art that had fallen into the ancient desolate city was most likely in this palace. The two of them were now on the side of the city lord's residence. Kang Shinmu's connection to the fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art was still the same as before. It was not very strong, but there was always a connection. This difference might have occurred because the city lord's residence itself was an artifact. If he entered the palace, his connection to the fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art might disappear. The city lord's residence had just appeared. Although the gate was already open, all the cultivators chose to wait and see. Currently, no one had entered. Kang Shinmu and Imoya were also waiting for a suitable opportunity. Senior, be careful. Kang Shinmu keenly sensed a cold aura in the air around him. He quickly reacted and pulled Imoya to the side. With a wave of his hand, he grabbed a whip. The entire body of the whip was dark red, and there were dense and complicated patterns on it. Faintly, the smell of blood could be sensed from it. It was the whip that the woman from the Boundless sect was holding. What surprised Kang Shinmu was that the bloody aura on the whip was very pungent, and when he grabbed the whip, it was stained with dark red blood. This blood was stained just now. Kang Shinmu's eyes narrowed as he glanced in the direction the whip had come from. This whip seemed to have come from the void, but in reality, it was so fast that it seemed to have disappeared. Anyone who stood in the way of the whip had their bodies pierced by the whip. The speed was so fast that some cultivators did not even have time to react before their bodies were pierced by Gufeng's whip. This was no ordinary whip. Rather, it had been soaked in the blood of the Boundless sect's guardian beast, the Scarlet Flame Qilin. This whip contained the power of the Scarlet Flame Qilin's bloodline. Gufeng named it Blood Scar. The Boundless sect's Scarlet Flame Qilin was the first beast to grasp method power in its beast form. Even though there had been very little news about the Scarlet Flame Qilin within the Boundless sect in recent years, most people were still wary of the Boundless sect's existence. As the daughter of the boundless sect master, Gu Feng's background was incredibly powerful. Very few people dared to provoke her. In addition, she had been soaked in the power of the Scarlet Flame Qilan's bloodline. Very few people were a match for Gu Feng. Only Tang Xiaoyu wasn't afraid of Gu Feng. He had first snuck into the Boundless sect, then stolen the Boundless sect's most prized treasure right in front of the Boundless sect's elders. Tang Xiaoyu had indeed stolen it, but he didn't have the ability to open the box that contained the Boundless sect's treasures. The Boundless sect's people knew this, which was why they didn't pursue the matter. They planned to capture Tang Xiaoyu as soon as the auction began. Gu Feng, however, refused to let Tang Xiaoyu go no matter what. She chased him all the way to the sealed realm. "Brother, let go." Tang Xiaoyu rushed over from the side. When he saw Kang Xinmu grab Gu Feng's blood scar with his bare hands, he reminded him. "This is that crazy woman's blood scar. It has been soaked in the Scarlet Flame Qilan's bloodline. It is incredibly powerful, and it loves to feast on human blood." Tang Xiaoyu seemed like a sloppy person, but he was actually quite meticulous. Naturally, he could tell that Kang Xinmu was not an ordinary person. The person who held the Extreme 10 Directions Demon Seal was most likely related to Emperor Shi. After all, Emperor Shi was his idol. He had always wanted to meet his idol, but he hadn't had many opportunities to do so. Now that he was able to see someone who was related to his idol, Tang Xiaoyu wanted to seize this opportunity. Kang Xinmu had seen records of the Scarlet Flame Qilan before. The missing ancestor of the dragon gods seemed to have fought with the Scarlet Flame Qilan. According to the records, the Scarlet Flame Qilan lost to the ancestor and disappeared. From what Tang Xiaoyu said, it seemed to be in the Wuxia sect. Kang Xinmu gripped the whip tightly. He felt waves of heat from it. This was the bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilan. Although the power was very weak, it was indeed the bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilan. The bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilan, which was soaked in the blood scar, also sensed Kang Xinmu's bloodline power of the dragon gods. At this moment, Kang Xinmu felt an extremely strong burning power. The bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilan on the blood scar instantly swept towards him. Kang Xinmu secretly released the bloodline power of the dragon gods to resist the bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilan. When the two powerful bloodline powers collided, the dim light around the whip suddenly lit up. The dark red whip suddenly turned crimson. A strong burning sensation spread from his body. In the end, Kang Xinmu's bloodline power of the dragon gods suppressed the bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilan. In this battle of bloodline powers, it seemed that Kang Xinmu had the upper hand, but in reality, he didn't gain any advantage. After all, the blood scar was only soaked in the bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilan, so it only contained a small part of the bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilan. Just a small part of the bloodline power was enough to be on par with Kang Xinmu. One could imagine how powerful the Scarlet Flame Qilan was. The battle between Kang Xinmu and the bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilan on the blood scar was very short. It only lasted for 3 breaths. Tang Xiaoyu shot a glance at Jiang Xinwu with an additional trace of thought-provoking meaning in his eyes. Gu Feng followed closely. When she saw that Kang Xinmu had caught her blood scar, her pretty face was terrifyingly gloomy. "You're not afraid of death?" Gu Feng narrowed her eyes, and a sharp light flashed in her eyes. Kang Xinmu clearly felt that there was a trace of cold aura on the whip. Different from the burning bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilan, this cold aura made Kang Xinmu feel cold. With the strength of Kang Xinmu's body, ordinary cold and heat couldn't hurt him at all. What was that sharp light that flashed in her eyes? "Hey, crazy woman, can't you look at the occasion?" At first, Tang Xiaoyu called Kang Xinmu Big Brother purely to keep Gu Feng busy, but he didn't really want to hurt Kang Xinmu. If Kang Xinmu could really see his idol, if he followed Kang Xinmu, he might also see his idol. Seeing that Kang Xinmu was being bullied by Gu Feng, Tang Xiaoyu definitely wouldn't agree. "Tang Xiaoyu, don't get in the way." Gu Feng waved her hand, and the blood scar that Kang Shinmu had caught suddenly disappeared. When it appeared again, it had already tied up Tang Xiaoyu. At this moment, at the entrance of the city lord residence, a strong suction suddenly emerged and wrapped all the cultivators present. Chapter 56-38. Find a well? Kang Shinmu glanced at Tang Xiaoyu and saw him being dragged out of the city lord residence's array by Gu Feng Shuegu. He couldn't help but sigh. Shuegu was indeed soaked in the red flame Qilin's blood. He could even break free from the array. The suction force from the city lord residence gradually formed an array around the palace. All the cultivators within the spell formation were locked on. The suction force from the array was so strong that even Kang Shinmu couldn't break free for a while. Among them, many cultivators had already been sucked into the palace by the array. All the cultivators gathered around the palace were here for the fragment of the 7 devouring demons sealing art. They were all strong cultivators. Although many cultivators were sucked into the array, there were also some cultivators who followed the array into the palace. There were also a few cultivators who had entered the palace before the array was activated. Kang Shinmu didn't belong to any of these 3 situations. The array's suction force was very strong. It locked his chi meridians for a while and prevented him from circulating the power in his body. However, Kang Shinmu's supreme divine fire power had already reached a terrifying level. He had also comprehended the supreme divine fire domain. Naturally, he could analyze clearly that the array that emerged from the city lord residence was actually a domain field that contained many kinds of domain powers. After being refined by the 7 devouring demons sealing art, Kang Shinmu's devouring power could devour domain powers. He boldly released his devouring power and devoured a part of the array's power. The moment Kang Shinmu released his devouring power, Moya sensed it. She knew that Kang Shinmu was going to devour the array's power. She frowned and looked at Kang Shinmu nervously. This formation was a domain field, and it contained several types of domain force. She knew that Kang Shinmu's devouring power could devour domain powers. However, it might be troublesome to devour so much domain powers at once. Unparalleled cultivators could cultivate unparalleled divine power. When they reached a certain realm, they would be able to comprehend the corresponding unparalleled domain power. Domain power was a cultivator's spiritual power and was controlled by the cultivator's consciousness. The battle between the supreme domain powers between cultivators could also be understood as the strength of one's soul consciousness. Generally speaking, no cultivator would allow a domain power that did not belong to them to invade their soul, consciousness, and sea of consciousness. If there was even the slightest mistake, the destruction of the supreme domain would be a small matter. However, if one's soul and consciousness were to be possessed, then it would be no different from the heart-devouring blood centipede. The array that Kang Shinmu wanted to devour was too complicated. Moya's beautiful eyes were fixed on Kang Shinmu's situation. If there was even the slightest mistake, she would have to stop Kang Shinmu immediately. Kang Shinmu was aware of the strength of the domain power he could devour, so he knew how to control himself. Although this was the case, Kang Shinmu was very bold. The devouring power that he released did not seem to have any intention of stopping as it continued to devour the domain power. There was a total of 5 types of domain power in the domain power that he devoured. Among them was the supreme divine fire domain power. This unexpected gain was something that Kang Shinmu did not expect. The first type of supreme domain power that he comprehended was the supreme divine fire domain power. If he devoured the supreme divine fire domain power in the array, his supreme divine fire domain power would achieve a qualitative breakthrough. After Kang Shinmu devoured the surrounding array, he realized that the array's restriction on him had disappeared. Moya, who was beside him, also did not seem to be restricted by the array. Kang Shinmu could not help but sigh at Senior Moya's strength. When Senior Moya possessed powerful supreme divine power, she also had a corresponding supreme divine power domain power. Senior Moya's supreme divine power was very strong, so the corresponding domain power would only be stronger. facing the restriction of the array, it would naturally not be affected. Without the restriction of the array, Kang Shinmu could leave the array and the palace's surroundings at any time. Before the array appeared, Kang Shinmu had already sensed that there was something strange in the palace. In addition, with the 7 devouring demon sealing art's remnant senses, he definitely had to enter the palace. Even without the restriction of the array, Kang Shinmu still took the initiative to approach the palace. Moya saw that Kang Shinmu was not affected by the array's domain power, so she followed behind Kang Shinmu. The moment he stepped through the palace's doors, an obscure power instantly attacked him, but it was quickly retracted. Kang Shinmu suddenly released the power of his soul. The moment the power was retracted, it swept over and locked a portion of the power. This was an extremely cold power. There was only a tiny bit of it, and Kang Shinmu was temporarily unable to identify what kind of power it was. Moreover, his soul consciousness and sea of consciousness could not contain this power. Kang Shinmu could only keep this power in the extreme 10-directional devil seal. The interior of the palace looked very different from the outside. The outside looked very small, but the inside was actually very big. The only connection was that the abnormality that he saw from the outside was real. The fog that appeared in front of him was not spiritual energy, nor was it any other aura that could be used for cultivation. Instead, it was the aura of an artifact that had been stored for a long time. There were thousands of weapons in the world, but only those that had an artifact spirit were artifacts. The strength of an artifact spirit would also determine the strength of an artifact. Of course, there were artifacts that were created by blacksmiths, and there were also artifacts that were born in the world. For the same type of artifact, artifacts that were born in the world were much stronger than those that were created by blacksmiths. It was precisely because they absorbed the power of nature in the world that they could become so strong. Correspondingly, such a strong artifact was also harder to control. Artifacts that were born in the world were more likely to turn on their owners. Every type of artifact that was left in the world for a long time would leak its own power. After a long time, the spiritual energy that leaked out would accumulate to a certain extent and become new power. From a certain point of view, it could be considered as an artifact that was derived from an artifact. In other words, this palace was indeed an artifact. Kang Shinmu, we can look for the source of this aura. We might be able to find an artifact that was derived from it. Moya's beautiful eyes scanned the surroundings, and her beautiful eyes locked onto a certain direction. It just so happened that Kang Shinmu also found the source of the aura, so they headed over together. Although the palace was an artifact, it had its own space, and its internal structure was no different from the mystic realm outside the ancient antiquity city. There were quite a number of cultivators that entered the palace earlier, but Kang Shinmu and Moya had been walking for a while, but they did not see a single cultivator. Instead, it felt like they had reached the end of the road. Kang Shinmu looked behind him. The road behind him was filled with white fog, and there was still not a single cultivator coming over. "Senior, please wait here for a while." Since the fog was derived from an artifact, it could be devoured. Chapter 5639. The white mist that permeated the surrounding space was the same as the formation that came out of the palace. It was essentially a type of domain power. However, compared to the complex domain power contained in the magic array, the domain power in the white mist was relatively simple. It could be understood as a part of the domain power in the formation. It was the holy ice domain power. Although Kang Shinmu could devour this power, he could not absorb it and use it for himself. The supreme domain power was a type of mental power that supreme cultivators could comprehend when their supreme god power reached a certain level. It was above the supreme god power and required a corresponding supreme god power to release it. So far, Kang Shinmu had only comprehended the power of the supreme god fire and the power of the heart soul. He still had not mastered the power of the Holy Land and had not come into contact with the power of the supreme god ice. There were 9 types of supreme god power in the blood mist. Among them was the power of the supreme god ice. However, compared to the power of the supreme god fire, the power of the supreme god ice was not easy to control. The two types of supreme god power did not sound very different, but in reality, there was an insurmountable gap between them. The power of the supreme god fire was the leader of all the flames in the world. With the power of the supreme god fire, one could control all the flames in the world. The power of the supreme god ice was different. The power of the supreme god ice did not control the ice or water of the great thousand worlds. Instead, it created ice out of thin air. It focused on creating ice out of thin air and then giving the created ice power to become one's own power. Kang Shinmu did not understand the sacred of the supreme god ice. Perhaps it had something to do with the lost supreme god power, but it was not something he could understand with his current power. However, if he obtained the complete power of the 7 devouring demons sealing art, it would be much easier to find clues about the lost supreme god power. All in all, before Kang Shinmu comprehended the power of the supreme god ice, he could not use the power of the supreme god ice domain. This power could only be placed in the extreme 10-directional devil seal. That was what Kang Shinmu thought at first, but reality was different. The power of the supreme holy ice domain, which had been devoured by the devouring power, was hidden in his mind and sea of consciousness. Kang Shinmu tried to sense it, but he was unable to detect the existence of the supreme holy ice domain. However, the power of the supreme sacred ice domain had not been rejected by his consciousness, so he did not pay much attention to it. After Kang Shinmu swallowed the white mist around him, his field of vision became much wider. He could also see cultivators passing by one after another. The cultivators who passed by were from different camps, but they were all moving in the same direction. That must be where the fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art was located. Senior Moya, let's go. Kang Shinmu and Moya also found the direction and followed the cultivators in front of them. Along the way, he met many people. I wonder how much longer it will take for Elder Sun to subdue this magic artifact. I feel that I will not even be able to defeat the power generated by this magic artifact. A long sigh came from the white mist. Then, someone bumped into Kang Shinmu. Sorry. That person apologized to Kang Shinmu politely. Kang Shinmu saw the person who bumped into him. He was dressed in black and white clothes, and the few people behind him were also dressed in the same clothes. However, the patterns embroidered on their clothes were different. The one who apologized had a complete tattoo of a mandala flower, while the few behind him only had flower petals. Their status was high, and it was obvious at a glance. The other party was also sizing up Kang Shinmu. After scanning Kang Shinmu from head to toe, he frowned. Then, he glanced at Moya, who was beside him, and his expression suddenly became strange. You are Kang Shinmu, right? Just now, he was still apologizing to Kang Shinmu politely, but when he saw that there were only 2 of them, Kang Shinmu and Moya, his tone suddenly became arrogant. I heard that you have a heaven and earth sacred item. Even the way he looked at Kang Shinmu was disdainful. He slanted his eyes, raised his head, and had the attitude of a superior. Senior brother Song, why are you talking nonsense with them? Let's get the heaven and earth sacred item before anyone finds them. The few disciples behind the person who spoke looked at Kang Shinmu and Moya and said. It was obvious that senior brother Song did not want to let Kang Shinmu off just like that. There's no hurry, take your time. He even glanced at Moya from time to time. To Kang Shinmu, this person was nothing more than a petty person who got what he wanted. One look and he could tell that he was usually bullied, which was why he apologized when he didn't see who he bumped into. When he saw that there was only Kang Shinmu and a weak girl, he immediately became excited. Kang Shinmu was used to this kind of person, so he didn't want to bother with him. However, he just had to put his attention on Moya, so he couldn't let him off so easily. Let's not talk about the heaven and earth sacred item first, this girl is really hot. Senior brother Song looked at Moya unscrupulously. Moya frowned in disgust. How could Kang Shinmu tolerate a despicable person disrespecting Moya? He didn't say anything else and waved his hand to give senior brother Song a solid punch on his face. This punch contained a powerful dragon martial technique, and it sent senior brother Song flying. He rolled for a few meters before he slowly came to a stop. "Kid, do you know who I am? How dare you hit me?" Senior brother Song wiped his mouth, and a few of his teeth fell out. Kang Shinmu was tired of hearing such familiar words. No matter who he was, he wouldn't let anyone who disrespected Imoya off. Kang Shinmu didn't say anything else, and he quickly repelled the junior brothers who wanted to help senior brother Song. He thought that there wouldn't be any more trouble, but the real trouble had just arrived. Just as Kang Shinmu repelled senior brother Song, a sword chi came from the front and stopped between Kang Shinmu and senior brother Song. If Kang Shinmu insisted on killing senior brother Song, he would definitely be hit by the sword chi, and both sides would be injured. The owner of the sword chi seemed to be warning Kang Shinmu. Kang Shinmu naturally understood the purpose of the sword chi, but he didn't retreat. He charged forward, and his palm struck the forehead of senior brother Song, who couldn't react in time. Senior brother Song didn't even have time to scream, and he collapsed to the ground. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. The owner of the sword chi also revealed himself. It was Ao Feng of the demon god race. Ao Feng glanced at senior brother Song, and his face darkened. "Kang Shinmu, you really aren't afraid of death." The sound of wind breaking could be heard, and the demon god race descended. At the same time, the surrounding white fog disappeared, and the true appearance of this place was revealed. It was a space of endless darkness, and only the space under their feet was emitting a strange dark light. "All of you back off. I will deal with him." Ao Feng's sword skills were impressive, and he was confident that he could take down Kang Shinmu. He had only swallowed someone else's supreme divine power, and he dared to do whatever he wanted. He even refined Ao Tong into a heart-devouring blood centipede. This was unforgivable. Ao Feng's hatred for Kang Shinmu could no longer be described with words. He, who only wanted revenge, didn't show any mercy to Kang Shinmu, and attacked immediately. Kang Shinmu immediately released his black dragon scales, and with the help of the black dragon scales, he caught a few sword chi from Ao Feng. After catching a few sword chi, he suddenly realized that these sword chi were not ordinary sword chi. They contained a sword chi domain. The sword chi domain ignored the defense of the black dragon scales, and it almost pierced through them. Chapter 5640. Supreme Divine Flame Domain. The moment Kang Shinmu released the Supreme Divine Flame Domain, Ao Feng recognized it. He sneered. "Is this what you're relying on? You and Ao Tong can't be brothers, right? So much nonsense." Kang Shinmu raised his eyebrows and said lightly. The Supreme Divine Fire Domain resisted the Sword Chi Domain that swept over. It would have been better if Kang Shinmu did not mention Ao Tong. Now that he mentioned Ao Tong, Ao Feng's face darkened, and the aura around him turned cold. "Kang Shinmu, I will make you pay me back tenfold." On the sword in Ao Feng's hand, two auras, one black and one white, emerged from the blade. A powerful sword energy suddenly appeared. In an instant, the entire space was left with two colors, black and white. Just like the auras that emerged from the blade, black and white represented two different attributes. White represented light, and black represented darkness. Normally, these two attributes would counter each other. But at this moment, these two attributes were perfectly combined, forming a powerful holy sword energy. Ao Feng waved his sword lightly, and the holy sword energy around him turned into multiple rays of sword energy that shot towards Kang Shinmu. As Kang Shinmu released his black dragon scales, he sent Amoya out of the range of the holy sword energy. The power of Ao Feng's supreme holy sword suddenly descended. The moment the holy sword energy swept over, Kang Shinmu already knew that his black dragon scales might not be able to block the sword energy. As expected, the black dragon scales were cut open by the holy sword energy. The pitch-black dragon scales were actually unable to withstand the power of the holy sword. Suddenly, Kang Shinmu thought of the dark steel power. The moment the holy sword energy cut open the black dragon scales, Kang Shinmu used his powerful soul consciousness to release the dark steel power. The power of dark steel immediately spread out around Jiang Shinwu's body, forming a black-colored cover. Currently, Kang Shinmu did not cultivate the supreme dark steel power, so the dark steel power shield was only at its basic level. After withstanding 2 rays of sword energy, the shield formed by the dark steel power was directly broken. The powerful sword chi forced Jiang Shinwu to retreat again and again. Only when his back was against the spatial barrier was he forced to stop. He only felt that his internal organs were about to shift positions, and the bursts of stabbing pain made him feel uncomfortable all over. My holy sword energy is specially used to break your dark steel shield. This was the first time the two clashed, and Ao Feng had the absolute advantage. He did not give Kang Shinmu any chance to catch his breath and waved his sword again. 2 bolts of lightning, one black and one white, emerged from within and gradually condensed together, forming a phantom that resembled a kuan and charged straight at Jiang Shinwu. The image carried a bloodline pressure, making Kang Shinmu, who was not in a good state, unable to move for a while. It was so fast that even though Kang Shinmu's eyes had been tempered by the 7 devouring demons' sealing art, he could only barely catch a glimpse of it. The moment Ao Feng released the sword energy, Kang Shinmu's soul consciousness felt an unprecedented sense of danger. If he were to face this power head-on with his current strength, he would most likely be smashed into pieces. Kang Shinmu did not hesitate to release his soul consciousness. Under the effect of his soul consciousness, the power in Kang Shinmu's body circulated a few times. That feeling of pressure gradually weakened. Although the image of the kuan formed by the black and white lightning was not the divine beast that Kang Shinmu knew, it was not able to cause pressure to Kang Shinmu, who was from the dragon god race. The pressure just now was just a kind of blood-binding ability. In other words, it was a part of the power of the supreme holy sword. It could lock a cultivator's blood and cause pressure to the cultivator's soul consciousness. This kind of pressure could directly destroy a cultivator's willpower. Many puppeteers who refined the heart-devouring blood centipede would use this method. The pressure disappeared, and Kang Shinmu released the supreme divine fire domain. Using the power of the domain, Kang Shinmu's figure flashed to the side. The sword energy formed by the black and white lightning suddenly descended. Boom! The powerful force shattered the ground under his feet and tore the space apart. Gusts of storms came from the shattered void. The seemingly ordinary gray shadow was destroying everything in this space with a destructive force. 2 members of the demon god clan who were standing close to the shattered void were directly torn apart by the force of the void. Even Ao Feng was taken aback by what he saw. Before coming here, he had used the holy sword domain to seal the space. Even if the sword energy rushed out of the holy sword domain, it would not break the space. Moreover, this palace itself was a kind of Dharma artifact. To break the space, it also had to break the Dharma artifact. All these abnormalities made Ao Feng's expression turn serious. Kang Shinmu was also shocked by the scene in front of him. His eyes narrowed, and the 7 devouring demon sealing art quietly lit up. The shattered space in front of him was indeed the void of the outside world. The gray shadow that swept out from it was also the power of the void storm. The power of the void storm was also a kind of natural power. However, there were very few people who cultivated the power of the void storm. After all, this kind of natural power was very difficult to control. Moreover, Kang Shinmu's eyes were condensed with the 7 devouring demons sealing art, and he could clearly see the essence of the void storm power. This kind of power clearly exceeded the scope of the supreme divine power. Seeing the void storm power surging over, Kang Shinmu hurriedly dodged. Kang Shinmu had seen the destructive power of the void storm power. Everywhere it passed, no one was left alive. However, what shocked Kang Shinmu was the long sword in Ao Feng's hand. Just now, a void storm power swept towards Ao Feng, but Ao Feng used his long sword to split the void storm power apart. After clashing with the void storm power, Ao Feng's long sword actually did not leave a single mark. The long sword looked like an ordinary sword. If there was anything special about it, it would be that the runes carved on the tip of the sword were more complicated. That's right, the runes. Just now, when the 7 devouring demon sealing art quietly activated, Kang Shinmu caught a glimpse of the runes on the tip of the long sword in Ao Feng's hand. That rune was somewhat similar to the runes on the 7 devouring demon sealing art. Moreover, when the 7 devouring demon sealing art was activated and Kang Shinmu sized up the long sword, Ao Feng seemed to have sensed something and looked over. A cold glint flashed across his deep eyes, and the meaning behind it was unclear. Kang Shinmu could not help but be suspicious. Could it be that Ao Feng has one of the fragments of the 7 devouring demon sealing art? According to the 7 devouring demon sealing art, the 7 devouring demon sealing art eventually turned into 8 fragments. Other than the core engraving that he had, there were 7 other fragments. This time, all the cultivators who came to the ancient desolate city came for a fragment of the ancient desolate city. Could it be that Ao Feng had already obtained this fragment? The reason why Jiang Shenwu was certain that Ao Feng did not possess the fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art was because Jiang Shenwu knew from the 7 devouring demon sealing art's inscription that the inscription was the first of the 8 fragments to appear. The fragment in the ancient desolate city could be considered the second one. Looking at Kang Shinmu's eyes, Ao Feng's expression turned serious. The look in Kang Shinmu's eyes made him very unhappy. What was even more strange was that the feeling that Kang Shinmu gave him was different from when he was at the city gate. From head to toe, he gave off a feeling that he did not belong in this place. When the void storm energy approached Kang Shinmu, there seemed to be a faint white mist emerging from his body, but it quickly disappeared. That power did not seem to be the power of the supreme divine fire. Chapter 56-41. The raging void storm energy destroyed this space. This also allowed Jiang Shenwu to discover that it was Ao Feng's doing that had sealed off the surrounding space. Now that the space shackles were broken, Kang Shinmu was no longer restrained. However, facing his benefactor, Kang Shinmu felt a headache coming on. The void storm's attack was aimless, and there was no way to predict its trajectory. One moment it was in front of him, the next moment it could be behind him or close in on him. Kang Shinmu could barely hold on with his black dragon scales, but Moya could not. He hurried to Moya's side and took her away. After the two of them flew out, the white mist followed closely behind them. Soon, the destroyed space was occupied by waves of white mist. Kang Shinmu, do you think you can escape? Ao Feng clearly would not let Kang Shinmu off so easily. To him, sealing the space was a simple matter. Ao Feng leaped into the air with the tip of his foot. As he dodged the void storm's attack, he waved the sword in his hand. On the blade of the long sword, one black and one white, the power of lightning appeared again. The two powers gathered together and abruptly appeared before Jiang Shenwu and Moya. They abruptly formed a four-sided prison, trapping the two of them once again. Ao Feng's figure followed closely behind. The powerful holy sword's power turned into countless sword chi and attacked Kang Shinmu and Moya with an unstoppable force. Kang Shinmu's supreme mystical fire's power had become more refined after a few battles. Against the powerful holy sword's power, the supreme mystical fire's power was obviously not enough. Being trapped in the Dharma treasure, Kang Shinmu could not gather the power of fire from the outside. He could only use his own power to resist. For a short period of time, the supreme mystical fire's power played a role in defense. But as time dragged on, the supreme mystical fire's power was quickly defeated. Especially the prison that Ao Feng had sealed up was a sword chi domain. Kang Shinmu was unable to break the sword chi domain. Being in the sword chi domain, he was unable to unleash his full strength, and could only passively defend. Senior Moya, I'll have to trouble you to stand behind me. Kang Shinmu's brows were tightly furrowed and his expression was solemn, but when he spoke to Moya, his tone was very relaxed. What are you going to do? Moya's beautiful eyes landed on Kang Shinmu. Her tone was no longer as gentle as before. Instead, it carried a trace of coldness. Don't worry. My skin is thick. It won't be a problem for me to block some sword beams. Kang Shinmu was glad that he had refined the pitch-black dragon scales earlier. Be careful to avoid the power of the nether storm, Moya said gently. Kang Shinmu nodded. Just as he said he would, the power of the void storm quickly swept over. Not only did it destroy the prison formed by Ao Feng's sword chi domain, it also dissolved the power of Ao Feng's holy sword. Taking advantage of this gap, Kang Shinmu broke free from the sword chi domain and unleashed his supreme divine fire domain. Since there was no power of fire here, he would create his own power of fire. This was the first time Kang Shinmu tried to use the supreme divine fire to create his own power of fire, and the result was a pleasant surprise. A scarlet flame swept over from the side and floated in front of Kang Shinmu. Vermilion bird flame. Kang Shinmu was overjoyed. It was actually the power of vermilion bird flame. That wasn't all. There was also a green flame and a milky white flame. Kang Shinmu recognized these two types of power of fire. The green flame was the supreme nether flame. That white flame power was the supreme heavenly flame. If there was only the power of vermilion bird flame, Kang Shinmu would have thought that it was his own power of fire. But since the supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame appeared, it was definitely not his own power of fire. The supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame were both power of nature. This kind of power could only be subdued and not created. Kang Shinmu was also very surprised. This palace actually had the power of fire such as the supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame. However, Kang Shinmu soon discovered that the supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame that appeared in his supreme divine fire domain were not the power of fire from the palace. Apart from the power of vermilion bird flame, the supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame were too heterogeneous. It also carried the power of other flames, as well as the extremely weak power of the 5 elements. It even carried some miscellaneous supreme martial skills. These supreme martial skills were all different, and they clearly did not come from the same cultivator. This was enough to prove that the supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame came from outside the palace. From the looks of it, the formation that appeared in the palace did not close the palace doors after bringing the cultivator inside. Since that was the case, he could summon more power of fire. Kang Shinmu focused his mind and summoned the power of fire again. At this time, Ao Feng was already in the range of Kang Shinmu's supreme divine fire domain. First, he was surrounded by the power of vermilion bird flame, then the supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame attacked him at the same time. Even if you summon all the fire in the world, it will be useless. This was Ao Feng's confidence in his supreme holy sword. Just as he said, he quickly destroyed the supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame that Kang Shinmu summoned. The attack was so fast that Kang Shinmu did not even have time to absorb the power of fire. The power of fire was instantly destroyed. Kang Shinmu reacted quickly and absorbed the power of vermilion bird flame. The power of vermilion bird flame was naturally not as strong as the supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame. However, for Kang Shinmu's power of fire, it was more than enough. After absorbing the power of vermilion bird flame, the supreme divine fire was strengthened. This time, Kang Shinmu did not defend passively. He used his devouring power to take the initiative to fight against Ao Feng's sword energy. Ao Feng used hundreds and thousands of sword energy. The number of sword energy that could be counted on one hand were black and white sword energy images that looked like the Kuan. The pressure that these sword energy images gave Kang Shinmu was much heavier than the other sword energy images. Kang Shinmu gathered all his power to resist the sword energy images. When the two sides collided, Kang Shinmu could clearly feel the pressure. There was also a part of the sword energy images that pierced through his power and penetrated the black dragon scales. Kang Shinmu instinctively gathered the power in his body and locked this foreign energy. However, What surprised Kang Shinmu was that the moment this foreign energy was locked, it disappeared. It was as if it had fused with his power. However, there was no change in his body. Kang Shinmu thought that his devouring power had devoured this foreign energy. Ao Feng understood Kang Shinmu's power very well. He knew that Kang Shinmu had relied on his devouring power to barge into the Dragon Demon Cave. It was also at that time that Kang Shinmu had devoured the Supreme Divine Power and entered the Supreme Divine Realm. However, this was, after all, a power that was devoured. Without steady comprehension, he would not be able to achieve anything great. Ao Feng continued to control the power of the Holy Sword. In an instant, the sword energy images that Kang Shinmu had blocked condensed again. Looking at the sword energy images in front of him, Kang Shinmu's eyes narrowed. These sword energy images were sword energy refined from the power of the Supreme Divine Sword. It could also be understood as a supreme martial technique. Chapter 56-42. Rather than saying that the sword chi that Kang Shinmu had dissolved reappeared, it was more accurate to say that Ao Feng had once again executed a peerless martial technique. The sword chi that was surrounded by black and white lightning pierced through the peerless divine fire and arrived in front of Kang Shinmu. Kang Shinmu had not comprehended the peerless dragon martial technique yet. He was only relying on his divine strength to deal with Ao Feng's peerless sword chi. Immediately, he released the devouring power that was refined by the 7 devouring demons sealing art. The devouring power instantly surrounded the several supreme sword chi martial skills that were coming at him. However, compared to the speed at which the devouring power devoured the peerless sword chi martial technique, the peerless sword chi martial technique was much faster. At this point, Kang Shinmu could no longer avoid it. He could only face it head-on. It was very difficult for the devouring power to devour the peerless sword chi martial technique. However, if he had the help of the 7 devouring demons sealing art, he would definitely be able to devour the peerless sword chi martial technique. The core engraving of the 7 devouring devil sealing art fragment that had fused with Jiang Shenwu's eyes, Jiang Shenwu was unable to open it as he pleased. However, he could not care so much at this point. If he could not open the 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment, he would most likely die. If he died, the 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment would be buried in the darkness once again. As Kang Shinmu thought so, he silently recited the incantation to open the 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment. The 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment seemed to have sensed Kang Shinmu's thoughts, and it suddenly opened. Whoosh! In that instant, a strong gust of wind blew past, and Kang Shinmu felt a stinging pain on his face. Following which, the devouring power that had turned into a storm suddenly expanded. Wherever the devouring power went, not only the peerless sword chi martial technique, but also the countless other sword chi were all devoured. After devouring the peerless sword chi martial technique, Kang Shinmu also comprehended the nature of the peerless sword martial technique. He did not cultivate sword intent, but he merged the peerless sword chi martial technique into the dragon martial technique. The dragon martial skill was tempered by the supreme sword chi martial skill, and finally became a supreme dragon martial skill. Ao Feng did not know when Kang Shinmu's devouring power had become so strong that it could even devour his supreme sword chi martial skill. He only noticed that there was something wrong with Kang Shinmu's eyes. That pair of deep eyes contained a dark light. It was clearly a mark. The mark that existed in Kang Shinmu's eyes was not complete. In fact, it was only an extremely small part of it. Even though it was only a small part, the strokes were very superficial. Ao Feng suddenly thought of something. He looked at the long sword in his hand and his eyes narrowed. The rune markings in Kang Shinmu's eyes were very similar to the rune markings on his saber. He'd obtained this sword from a ruin in the Outer Realm. The ruins were suspected to be the battlefield between the ancient Martial Kingdom and the 10,000 Gu Kingdom. The runes on the sword were written in the language of the ancient Martial Kingdom. Furthermore, the runes were written by the first owner of the 7 devouring demon sealing art, Feng. Could it be that Kang Shinmu had already obtained the ancient desolate city's 7 devouring demons sealing art? So he had something to rely on. No wonder he was so arrogant. Even though Kang Shinmu's supreme dragon martial skill was able to block Ao Feng's supreme sword chi martial skill, he could not relax at all. When the 7 devouring demon sealing art was activated, he could see many details with his eyes that he could only sense with his soul consciousness. It was not an exaggeration to say that Ao Feng's every move was under Kang Shinmu's control. With this, Kang Shinmu's supreme dragon martial skill barely gained the upper hand. Even so, Kang Shinmu was still unable to suppress Ao Feng. On the other hand, Ao Feng, who had the supreme sword chi martial skill, became more and more courageous. He gradually understood Kang Shinmu's supreme dragon martial skill, and once again suppressed Kang Shinmu. But Ao Feng could only suppress Kang Shinmu, and he was unable to take down Kang Shinmu in one move. Furthermore, Kang Shinmu was always able to avoid fatal attacks. Can you see through my moves? Ao Feng's eyes narrowed as he pondered over the mark that flashed across Kang Shinmu's eyes. That mark seemed to be able to see the trajectory of his supreme sword chi martial skill. I have to say that the thing in your eyes is quite powerful. But this is not enough. You cannot escape. As Ao Feng finished speaking, a hexagram sword array appeared around Kang Shinmu. The moment the hexagram sword array appeared, Kang Shinmu's body stiffened, and his movements became sluggish. The supreme sword chi martial skill produced by the hexagram sword array attacked Kang Shinmu relentlessly. Kang Shinmu activated the extreme 10-directional devil seal, and the 9 seals of the extreme 10-directional devil seal flew out and collided with the supreme sword chi martial skill. The instant the two forces collided, the surrounding space was shaken and torn apart. The moment the void storm from the side attacked, it tore apart the fragile space. Another void storm came from the void. Kang Shinmu quickly broke through the hexagram sword array and descended. The void storm that came from the sides suddenly attacked. It brushed past Kang Shinmu's body and reached Ao Feng. Ao Feng was only slightly touched by the void storm, and his left arm was twisted and deformed. The void storm contained an unknown power, and it directly entered Ao Feng's body through his left arm. In order to protect his body, Ao Feng decisively chopped off his left arm. While he was down, I will take his life. Kang Shinmu took advantage of the fact that Ao Feng was distracted, and Kang Shinmu took the opportunity to chase after him. The 9 seals of the extreme 10-directional devil seal landed on Ao Feng's body. Ao Feng wanted to use the supreme sword chi domain to dissolve the 9 seals of the extreme 10-directional devil seal. However, the speed of the 9 seals was faster than the void storm. In the end, Ao Feng couldn't dodge it, and his body fell to the ground, falling into the hexagram sword array. At this moment, Ao Feng's body was covered in injuries, and his body was covered in blood. His aura was so weak that it was almost undetectable. Kang Shinmu heaved a sigh of relief and prepared to deal another fatal blow to Ao Feng. It was this short span of time that led to a disaster. Ao Feng's aura, which had disappeared, suddenly grew stronger. The intensity of his aura reached a terrifying level, and it could even resist the void storm. Ao Feng was going to self-destruct. Ao Feng was different from Ao Tong. It could be said that their strength was not on the same level. Compared to Ao Tong, who had abandoned his soul and consciousness to form a puppet, Ao Feng's self-destruction would definitely have a serious impact on this space. No, not only this space. If that happened, even the palace would be destroyed. The intensity of this power was not something that the current Kang Shinmu could resist. Of course, he didn't have the guts to resist. If he wasn't careful, he would be blown to smithereens. Senior Amoya, let's go out first. Kang Shinmu determined the exit of the palace based on the source of the Supreme Underworld Flame and Supreme Heavenly Flame. He brought Amoya and headed for the exit. However, there was nothing at the place where the exit was supposed to be. Not only that, the entire space started to shake violently. At the same time, a white fog suddenly appeared. Following which, a black lightning bolt appeared above the palace, penetrated the entire palace, and landed beside Kang Shinmu and Emoya. The moment this black lightning bolt appeared, the second seal of the 7 devouring demon sealing art in Kang Shinmu's eyes lit up. Chapter 56-43. Kang Shinmu stared at the black thunderbolt in front of him. The black thunderbolt fell from the sky and stopped in this space. The aura that leaked out from it caused the air to tremble. Because of the appearance of this black thunderbolt, more and more cultivators gathered around. Kang Shinmu could clearly feel the changes in the 7 devouring demon sealing art, but he knew that this was not a place to stay for long. With Ao Feng's strength, if he self-destructed, the entire palace would be destroyed. At that time, the powerful energy produced by the explosion would affect all the cultivators who entered the palace. Senior, follow me. The 7 devouring demon sealing art lit up completely, and Kang Shinmu could clearly see the changes in the air flow in the surrounding space. With the appearance of the black thunderbolt, the energy in the surrounding space surged rapidly. The derivative Dharma treasures in the palace were also gathering in this direction. But there was one place that was very special. That was the direction where Ao Feng self-destructed. Just now, Kang Shinmu used the power of the Void Storm to defeat Ao Feng. Ao Feng used the most extreme method to drag Kang Shinmu down with him. Originally, Kang Shinmu and Emoya had come here to avoid Ao Feng's self-destruction. They did not expect that the exit of the palace would be closed. Not only that, the energy in the entire palace was gathering. At this time, the space where Ao Feng self-destructed was the calmest. Jiang Shenwu, have you discovered anything unusual about that black thunderbolt? Emoya's beautiful eyes glanced at the black thunderbolt that had penetrated most of the space as she asked in a gentle voice. It has the power of the 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment, but it is not the 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment. Kang Shinmu was very sure. At first glance, this black thunderbolt indeed looked like the 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment. But Kang Shinmu, who had the core inscription of the 7 devouring demon sealing art, could clearly identify the 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment. Looking at the aura emitted by this black thunderbolt and the patterns on its body, it seemed that someone had transferred the power of the 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment over. It couldn't be said that this was a fake fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art. It could only be said to have obtained a portion of the 7 devouring demon sealing art's power. Now that this power had appeared, it gathered all the power in this palace. At this rate, the true fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art would be drawn out sooner or later. Do you still remember that after you entered the ancient desolate city, you mentioned that you have a connection with the fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art? Mo Yawen Judo. Yes, there was a certain connection when we first came in, and the location wasn't here. Kang Shinmu still remembered that direction. Perhaps that's where the true fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art is located, Emoya said softly. Senior, you're right, but we can't get out now, Kang Shinmu said helplessly. All the cultivators who entered the palace knew that this palace was an artifact. But who would have thought that this mystic treasure would close its entrance on its own? Now that the mystic treasure's aura was so unstable, other than being affected by the black lightning, it was also because of Ao Feng's self-destruction. Let's not talk about whether the black lightning would be able to break this mystic treasure. With Ao Feng's desperate attack, it would definitely be able to destroy this mystic treasure. Of course, unless this mystic treasure was a heavenly saint item. Kang Shinmu suddenly thought of something and looked at the surrounding space. The surging aura had already started to expand. Kang Shinmu looked at Emoya and saw that Emoya's beautiful eyes were staring in one direction. That direction was where they had planned to go previously, and it was highly possible that it was where the fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art was. Senior Emoya, we are unable to leave this mystic treasure space, so we can't go over to investigate. Compared to this, Kang Shinmu had a bad premonition. The sudden appearance of the black lightning was obviously to attract the true fragment of the 7 devouring devils' sealing art. Ever since the mysterious black lightning appeared, it had been there. It was to attract the fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art to this place. If it was just to make the fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art appear, they only needed to break the seal. Every cultivator who came to the ancient desolation ancient city had this ability. However, the reality was that the owner of the palace had paid a price to attract the fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art. Could it be that the owner of the palace had already made arrangements to destroy the fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art? After all, this palace was a heavenly saint item. It was completely possible for it to destroy the fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art. This question was quickly verified. "They're here." Moya's soft voice sounded. Jiang Shenwu heard the voice and looked over, only to see densely packed figures surging over from the white fog. Those figures all had unfamiliar faces, but their clothes were very uniform. It was the uniform of General Lang Changhong's subordinates. To be exact, this large group was the Ancient Desolation Ancient Cities patrol team. After this patrol team appeared, they went straight towards the black lightning. As soon as they came into contact with the black lightning, they all disappeared one by one. No, they did not disappear. Instead, the man-eating parasitic insects that made them turned into streams of blood qi and merged with the black lightning. As the blood qi continued to flow into the black lightning started to turn blood red. At the same time, a dangerous force was gradually born. Kang Xinmu suddenly felt a sharp pain in his eyes. That extremely dangerous force suddenly attacked him. "Senior, let's go." Kang Xinmu and Moya left the black lightning and came to the place where he fought with Ao Feng. There were even more cultivators gathered here than at the Black Thunderbolt's side. "Everyone, be careful. The black lightning is accumulating energy." No one knew which cultivator shouted. More and more cultivators came in the direction of Kang Xinmu. Ao Feng, Ao Feng. Aoe, the demon god race's clan leader, also came from the side. When he saw that Kang Xinmu was safe and sound, he became even more furious. Aoe knew that Ao Feng was very strong. Ao Feng's understanding of the supreme sword qi and divine power far surpassed his own. However, Ao Feng had a fatal weakness, which was that he was too stubborn. Victory and defeat were often decided in an instant. Those who were too stubborn could very likely lose. Kang Xinmu was cunning, and many experts had fallen in his hands. Unexpectedly, even Ao Feng was not spared. Ao Yi's face was so gloomy that it was about to drip water. He clenched his fists, and waves of black qi were emitted from his hands, spreading towards Kang Xinmu. "You can't even protect yourself, and you still have the mood to fight? Is everyone from the demon god race to the clan leader so reckless?" Tang Xiaoyu, who had a bright smile on his face, appeared from the side and stood between Aoe and Kang Xinmu. "Who are you?" Aoe glanced at Tang Xiaoyu and said coldly. "I am not a thing. My name is Tang Xiaoyu." Tang Xiaoyu suddenly felt that something was wrong. However, he couldn't figure out what was wrong. Chapter 56-44. Tang Xiaoyu's words stunned not only Aoe, but even Kang Xinmu was slightly startled. What shocked Kang Xinmu was that Tang Xiaoyu and Gu Feng had clearly left the range of the palace's array formation. Why did he appear in the palace now? Did he use the manifestation origin stacking technique to enter? "Brother Jiang, I just heard from that crazy woman that this palace is comparable to a sacred grade magic tool." In order to see his idol, Tang Xiaoyu thought about it and decided to build a good relationship with Kang Xinmu first. It is a magic tool personally refined by the ancient Desolation City Lord. Although its quality is not at the level of a sacred grade magic tool, the materials were collected by the City Lord during his journey. That black thunderbolt is the core of the magic tool. Tang Xiaoyu did not hide anything and told Kang Xinmu everything he knew. Of course, Most of the cultivators present might have already learned about this information after entering the magic tool. However, there was one thing that most of the people present did not know. The existence of this magic tool was not to store the fragments of the 7 devouring demons sealing technique, but to destroy the fragments of the 7 devouring demons sealing technique. The city lord of the ancient Desolation City was also the ancient martial country's general Leng Zhonghong, who mysteriously disappeared. The ancient martial country lost Leng Zhonghong and was already in a weak position, so they were destroyed by the 10,000 Gu country. Leng Zhonghong later obtained some mysterious power and appeared in the 10,000 Gu country. He destroyed the 10,000 Gu country with his own strength. However, he also paid a price for this and became neither human nor demon. Later, it was said that General Leng Zhonghong could not control his inner demons and committed suicide. Many years later, the story of the 7 devouring demon sealing technique spread throughout the world. There were all sorts of rumors about the 7 devouring demon sealing technique, but no one who actually came into contact with the 7 devouring demon sealing technique had ever appeared. It was not that the 7 devouring demon sealing technique was too mysterious, but those who possessed the 7 devouring demon sealing technique mostly ended up like Leng Zhonghong. Up until now, probably only Feng had possessed the 7 devouring demon sealing technique and was not affected. There was a very prominent record that stated that Feng was the first owner of the 7 devouring demon sealing technique, and it was also Feng who personally sealed it. Combining all of these events, the mysterious power that General Leng Zhonghong obtained back then was the newly discovered 7 devouring demon sealing art. He was unable to control the power of the 7 devouring demon sealing art, which was why he suffered the backlash. Leng Zhonghong's obsession remained in the ancient desolate city, and he was determined to destroy the 7 devouring devil sealing art. Thus, in this city, he forged this magic tool, Meteor, in order to destroy the 7 devouring devil sealing art. However, the 7 devouring demon sealing art that was left behind was incomplete. There was only one fragment of the ancient desolate city. That black bolt of lightning was the core of the destruction. Leng Zhonghong originally wanted to use annihilation to draw the remaining fragments of the 7 devouring devil sealing art, but there were too many unforeseen events. In the end, the ancient desolate city fell into the moving secret realm. That was the appearance it was showing now. The sealed mystic realm was an unknown variable in Leng Zhonghong's plan to destroy the 7 devouring demon sealing art. Of course, due to the influence of the sealed mystic realm, more cultivators would come to the ancient desolate city. To General Leng Zhonghong, it was a material to refine annihilation. Whether it was the cultivators who entered the sealed mystic realm in the beginning, or the cultivators who entered the sealed mystic realm now, most of them would go to the ancient desolate city for the fragments of the 7 devouring demon sealing art. The price was to be eaten by the puppet parasite, and become a puppet. In the end, it became part of the power of the destruction. Now that the power of the destruction was basically complete, it was enough to destroy the fragments of the 7 devouring demon sealing art. If they didn't leave this palace in time, it would be bad. Brother Jiang, that's the situation. Tang Xiaoyu's tone was very sincere. Now that the destruction magic tool is about to explode, we have to leave as soon as possible. With the 10,000 elephants essence superposition technique, he could send Kang Xinmu out of here. Suddenly, Tang Xiaoyu glanced at Imoya, who was at the side, and his expression suddenly froze. The destruction magic tool had already closed all the entrances and exits, and using the 10,000 elephants essence superposition technique could bring people out. With his current ability, he could only bring one person at a time. Imoya understood tacitly and instantly saw through the problem Tang Xiaoyu was facing. In addition, she was also afraid that Kang Xinmu would be too impulsive and go head-on against the destruction magic tool, so she chose to let Tang Xiaoyu bring Kang Xinmu out first. Kang Xinmu, I'll cover you guys to leave this place. Imoya smiled and spoke in a gentle voice. No. Kang Xinmu was the first to disagree. Seeing that the two of them were suddenly being modest, Tang Xiaoyu was a little anxious. Brother Jiang, time is pressing, we won't make it. Please bring the senior out first. Kang Xinmu placed a hand on Tang Xiaoyu's shoulder and said firmly. After saying that, he took a few steps to the side. Kang Shinmu. Mo Ye's delicate brows slightly furrowed. She knew that Kang Shinmu was very talented, and his ability to understand things was also extraordinary. However, Kang Shinmu's biggest weakness was that he did things without consideration. His understanding of supreme divine power was not enough to withstand the power brought by the destruction of a heaven and earth holy grade magic tool. For the first time, Kang Shinmu ignored Senior Mo Ye's call. Compared to him, Senior Mo Ye needed to leave the destruction more. His skin was rough and thick, so it was not a big problem for him to be blasted by the destruction. Senior, please excuse me. When Tang Xiaoyu heard Kang Shinmu call Mo Ye Senior, he felt respect for her from the bottom of his heart, and his words and actions were very humble. Mo Ye's delicate brows were tightly furrowed, and her pair of beautiful eyes fell on Kang Shinmu, unwilling to move away. In terms of personal considerations, Tang Xiaoyu would definitely protect Kang Shinmu first. As long as Kang Shinmu was safe, he would have the chance to see his idol. However, to Kang Shinmu, this Senior Mo Ye was clearly more important. Tang Xiaoyu did not delay at all, and he nimbly executed the 10,000 Elephants Origin Superimposition technique, sending Mo Ye out. Senior, please wait here for a moment. Tang Xiaoyu hurriedly instructed before he executed the 10,000 Elephants Origin Superimposition technique again. However, in the next moment, Tang Xiaoyu's expression turned ugly. The destruction was activated. The destruction was a Dharma artifact, and even though it had its own space inside, it was still a Dharma artifact in essence. Now that the destruction had been activated, the space inside had been torn apart, and there was no way to find Kang Shinmu's exact location. Kang Shinmu had already expected this outcome. Now, he was only glad that Senior Mo Ye had left the destruction. The destruction was activated, and the white fog inside it surged even more violently. Of course, there was still a powerful force that could not be ignored. That was the force produced by Ao Feng's self-destruction. This force gradually formed a vortex, and it actually went against the black lightning force. Coupled with the void storm force that surged out from the torn space, the three forces fought against each other. Facing these three forces, none of the cultivators present dared to underestimate them. The only person who was calm now was probably Kang Shinmu. Kang Shinmu used the power of the seven devouring demon sealing art to nimbly avoid the attacks of the three forces. He found a relatively safe place, and his body was surrounded by white fog. Kang Shinmu simply sat down, focused his mind, and meditated. Chapter 56-45. The surging white mist suddenly gathered towards Kang Shinmu. Kang Shinmu could clearly feel the power of the sacred ice realm sweeping towards him. At the same time, the power of the sacred ice realm that he had absorbed earlier seemed to have received a response and surged as well. Although the power of the sacred ice domain in Jiang Shenwu's Sea of Consciousness was surging violently, it did not affect his Sea of Consciousness at all. Kang Shinmu calmed himself down and quietly absorbed the power of the sacred ice realm that existed in the white mist. The power of the sacred ice realm that was generated from the annihilation was huge. Although Kang Shinmu's absorption speed was very fast, the white mist that floated in the surrounding space was still very thick. This was a great opportunity for Kang Shinmu. Unfortunately, he was unable to use the power of the sacred ice realm at the moment. After leaving the sealed mystic realm, he had to think of a way to comprehend the power of the supreme sacred ice. He could only use the power of the sacred ice realm after mastering the power of the supreme sacred ice. Within the annihilation realm, the three powers collided continuously. Every time they collided, the surrounding space would be torn apart, causing the surrounding void storm to become stronger and stronger. After the 10th collision, the power of the void storm had reached a terrifying level. The power produced by Ao Feng's supreme divine power's self-destruction was also maximized. The three powers collided for the last time. At the moment of collision, all the cultivators in the annihilation realm could clearly feel the airflow in the space suddenly stop. The entire space seemed to have been left behind by time and fell into a strange silence. There was not a single sound, and no aura of any cultivators leaked out. There was not a single trace of aura flowing. Kang Shinmu, who was absorbing the power of the sacred ice realm, keenly sensed that the surrounding white mist had suddenly condensed. Before he could react to what was happening, he sensed that the extreme 10-directional devil seal had suddenly activated. This was the first time the extreme 10-directional devil seal had activated all 9 seals of its own accord. The demonic power that surged out did not attack the surrounding cultivators, nor did it block the floating power in the surrounding space. Instead, it surrounded Kang Shinmu tightly. Compared to the heavenly saint grade that had perished, the 10-directional devil seal that Kang Shinmu possessed was a genuine heavenly saint grade. With the protection of the extreme 10-directional devil seal, Kang Shinmu was not affected by the 3 powers. Correspondingly, under the influence of perish, the 7 devouring devil sealing art in Kang Shinmu's eyes automatically activated. With the help of the 7 devouring devil sealing art, Kang Shinmu could barely see the scene of the 3 forces colliding. Where the 3 forces intersected, a mysterious vortex door that looked like a black hole appeared. The vortex gate was only the size of an adult's fist. It was this seemingly small vortex door that had absorbed all of Third Ant's powerful power and neutralized the collision of the 3 forces. If Kang Shinmu did not have the 7 devouring devil sealing art seal, he would have thought that the stillness of the scene was because the 3 forces had reached the same level and neutralized each other. However, it was different now. Kang Shinmu had the 7 devouring devil sealing art seal, so he saw what had happened just now. Although the mysterious vortex door had only flashed for a moment, Kang Shinmu was sure that he had not seen it wrongly. When he was still in the transcendent God realm, he had kept following the cultivation pace of the cultivators in the Supreme God realm in order to reach the Supreme God realm. Only when one reached the supreme level and comprehended the Supreme God power would they be able to become a supreme level cultivator. While cultivating the Supreme God power, they would also comprehend the Supreme God power domain. Above the Supreme God realm were the rules that Kang Shinmu had never encountered before. Now, Kang Shinmu saw the mysterious black vortex door again. What kind of existence was that black vortex door? How could it easily absorb the 3 powerful forces at the same time? With Kang Shinmu's current knowledge, he could not guess its existence. He could only vaguely feel that the path of cultivation was a long and boring one that he could not reach the end of. Under the protection of the extreme 10-directional devil seal, the collision of the 3 forces did not affect Kang Shinmu at all. The only regret was that the white fog had disappeared along with it. After calculating it, he had only absorbed about 1% of the Holy Ice Realm's power. As for the other cultivators, whether it was their movements or the power in their bodies, they were all forced to stop. Fortunately, this strange scene only lasted for 3 breaths of time before collapsing. All the cultivators once again felt the flow of energy in the space. The moment they came back to their senses, all the cultivators sighed at the power of the 3 forces. Especially the power of Ao Feng's self-destruction. The counterattack of a cultivator before his death was actually so powerful that it was enough to resist the power of the void storm. It was because the 3 forces were equally powerful that when they collided with each other, the power of the 3 forces would cancel each other out. The effect of the power canceling each other out was also known as the other side of spacetime. It meant the forgotten spacetime. It could be understood that when the 3 forces collided, spacetime was distorted, and the power was lost to the other side of spacetime. When it collided on the other side of spacetime, it would not affect the current spacetime. However, the power that distorted spacetime was very strong. When the other side of spacetime was opened, it would affect the current spacetime. This was the still state that suddenly appeared. Among all the cultivators present, only a few could sense the state of the other side of spacetime. Although Kang Shinmu did not know the state of the other side of spacetime, he used the 7 devouring demon sealing art to see the scene just now. That black vortex door was the state of the other side of spacetime. After the 3 forces collided, the space formed by the death destruction was destroyed. Everyone returned to the desolate ancient city. At this time, on the city wall closest to the palace, stood a young man. The young man was the one that Kang Shinmu and the others had met not long ago. He had a passerby face and was unrecognizable. He was condensing some kind of seal with his hand. As if he had found something, he quickly withdrew his hand and disappeared. Right at the instant his figure vanished, Gu Tianzi flashed over. His face was solemn. He looked around for a moment, but did not find the target. Then he left while cursing, "Damn it, I was fooled by that boy Qing Fu again." The destruction of the death destruction also meant that the patrol teams in the desolate ancient city and the residents in the city had all disappeared. Inside the desolate ancient city, only the cultivators who came to search for the fragments of the 7 devouring demon sealing art were left. Kang Shinmu's eyes fell on the ruins of the death destruction. It seemed that there was something that looked like a key left. Just when he was about to take it, he saw that the thing disappeared into thin air. Kang Shinmu roughly judged that the person was Tang Xiaoyu by the degree of the distortion of the space. Sure enough, Tang Xiaoyu soon showed his figure. "Brother Jiang, this is a high-level imitation of the fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art. It condenses the power of the 7 devouring demon sealing art. You can use it to find the real fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art in the desolate ancient city." Before Tang Xiaoyu finished his words, the thing in his hand suddenly flew into the air. Now all the cultivators saw the token of finding the fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art. One by one, they began to grab it crazily. Chapter 56-46. "Brother Jiang, this was an accident. Wait for me to get it back." Tang Xiaoyu's body moved and suddenly disappeared. Kang Shinmu's reaction was even faster. He grabbed Tang Xiaoyu's collar and pulled him out of the 10,000 origin superposition technique. "Let them fight." Kang Shinmu glanced at the token floating in the air. General Leng Changhong spent a lot of effort to refine the fallen annihilation, which was comparable to a heaven and earth saint treasure, just to destroy the 7 devouring demon sealing art. Now that the fallen annihilation was destroyed, the 7 devouring demon sealing art seemed to have lost its threat, but in reality, it was still facing hidden dangers. Or rather, it was Kang Shinmu himself who was facing unknown dangers. The fallen annihilation existed to destroy the 7 devouring demon sealing art. The space created by the fallen annihilation only contained fragments of the 7 devouring demon sealing art's power. But the fallen annihilation was still activated, and the location where the core of the fallen annihilation descended was clearly towards Kang Shinmu. In other words, from the moment Kang Shinmu entered the ancient desolate city, General Leng Changhong had his eyes on him. Out of all the cultivators who came to the secret sealed realm, only Kang Shinmu had the 7 devouring demon sealing art's core engraving. General Leng Changhong's intention was clear. He wanted to use the fallen annihilation to destroy the 7 devouring demon sealing art's core engraving, and then use this power to destroy the entire ancient desolate city. At that time, whether it was the 7 devouring demon sealing art's core engraving, or the 7 devouring demon sealing art's fragments in the ancient desolate city, they would all be destroyed. If Ao Feng didn't risk his life to kill Kang Shinmu, which led to the Void Storm's power, General Leng Changhong's plan would have developed smoothly. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. The token that could summon the 7 devouring demon sealing art's fragment floating in the air was also controlled by General Leng Changhong. He still existed. Whether he was a living person, a puppet, or some other form. Leng Changhong still existed in the ancient city. Kang Shinmu had a premonition that Leng Changhong was in the direction he sensed, secretly observing everything. Kang Shinmu. Just as Jiang Shenwu was pondering all of this, a clear and cold voice sounded out by his ear. Only then did he remember that he had been too preoccupied with thinking about the problem just now and had not looked for Amoya in time. Just as Jiang Shenwu thought, Amoya was a little angry that he didn't look for her immediately after he got out of danger. Amoya's pretty face had a rare look of anger. There was also a hint of reproach in her gentle and beautiful eyes. "Senior," Mo said. For a moment, Jiang Shenwu didn't know how to explain to Moya, so he said this. Mo said. Kong, her beautiful eyes sized up Jiang Shenwu. Seeing that Jiang Shenwu wasn't injured, her worried heart finally relaxed. You're not allowed to make decisions on your own in the future, do you understand? Although Moya's words were gentle, the reproach in her tone made Jiang Shenwu feel guilty. Kang Shenwu nodded. He didn't say anything. Tang Xiaoyu had an inexplicable respect for Moya. He didn't dare to say anything when Moya opened her mouth. He stood obediently at the side and looked at the key. When the key was floating, it didn't have any luster. At this moment, the key lit up with a dark red halo and pointed in a direction. Brother Jiang, Senior, I heard from that crazy woman that it can find the whereabouts of the 7 devouring demons sealing art. Tang Xiaoyu suddenly recalled what he had heard from Gu Feng. Seeing Kang Shenwu was still silent, Tang Xiaoyu added, she's annoying, but she's the daughter of the Everlasting Pavilion's master. Her words are trustworthy. Kang Shenwu was familiar with the Everlasting Pavilion. Gu Feng had the magic weapon Bloodstain. She had soaked in the Scarlet Flame Qilin's bloodline power. Kang Shenwu had fought with her not long ago. He knew how strong she was. According to Tang Xiaoyu, Everlasting Pavilion's people were not only Gu Feng, there were others. The 7 devouring demon sealing art that General Ling Changhong wanted to destroy at all costs, had such a strong attraction at this time. Kang Shenwu glanced at the key floating in the air. He chose to wait and see. In this situation, fighting for the key was undoubtedly the first bird to stand out. Kang Shenwu never did things like paving the way for others. However, Kang Shenwu didn't want to cause trouble, but someone took the initiative to provoke him. The key floating in the air flashed with a dark red halo. It gradually condensed together and formed a directional symbol. The direction was exactly where Kang Shenwu was. For a moment, all the cultivators' attention was focused on Kang Shenwu. Kang Shenwu, who was preparing to leave, sensed the abnormality and his body stiffened. Tang Xiaoyu's expression was also very serious. He stood at the side, ready to attack at any time. Brother Jiang, this is what I wanted to say. Kang Shenwu pursed his lips and kept quiet. From the looks of it, he was being watched by Ling Changhong. Not only that, the key floating in the air clearly told the other cultivators that Kang Shenwu had the fragment of the 7 devouring demons sealing art. The only fortunate thing was that no one knew whether Kang Shenwu had the fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art from the ancient desolate city or some other fragment. The atmosphere became heavy because of the key token. However, very quickly, a warning voice broke the deadlock. Tang Xiaoyu, I'm warning you. I was the one who wanted the extreme 10 devil seal first. You better not interfere. Otherwise, you'll be in trouble. Gu Feng's figure swept over from the side. Bloodstain followed closely behind. Bloodstain was thrown from the key token with a swift and fierce force. The key token was knocked to the ground, and the directional symbol on it was slightly off. Crazy woman, I came with a mission this time. I'm not going to mess with you. Tang Xiaoyu's eyes quickly swept across the key token on the ground. He suddenly changed his direction and swept towards a palace. That palace was the direction where Kang Shenwu could vaguely sense the fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art. Ever since he entered the ancient desolate city, he could feel the connection between the fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art. Tang Xiaoyu's action also pointed out a path for most of the cultivators, and they all followed Tang Xiaoyu's footsteps. All the cultivators who came to the ancient desolate city wanted to obtain the fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art. No one wanted to fall behind others. Although the fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art is not a precious treasure, you still want to get a share of it with your ability? Why don't you leave as soon as possible? Losing face is a small matter, but losing the face of Heaven Yuan Palace is a big problem. Gu Feng did not show any mercy to Tang Xiaoyu. She smiled mockingly and went straight to Kang Shenwu. Compared to the fragment of the 7 devouring demons sealing art, she was more concerned about the extreme 10 devil seal. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.